Section 1. The Whisper of Evergreen Terrace. There is something particular about the way Springfield looks at night. Not the night inside the episodes, though Springfield has plenty of those. Springfield looks at night. Not the night inside the episodes, though Springfield has plenty of those. The Halloween specials. The late-night drives past the nuclear plant when the cooling towers glow against a purple sky. The quiet scenes where Homer sits on the porch steps while the rest of the house sleeps and the street outside is still. And you can almost hear the crickets even though this is a cartoon and the crickets are implied rather than drawn. No. I mean the night you watch Springfield. The specific quality of the light from your screen in a dark room. The way the colors of the show, that particular warm yellow, that burnt orange sunset, the deep blue of night sky over Evergreen Terrace, they spread out softly when everything around you has gone quiet. There is something about The Simpsons that was always meant for this hour. Something that rewards the kind of watching that only happens when you have nowhere to be and nothing urgently requiring your attention. The slow, patient kind of watching. The kind where you start noticing things. And The Simpsons, more than almost any other show in the history of television, has been hiding things for you to notice. This is going to be a long, gentle walk through those hidden things. We are not going to rush. We are not going to chase down shocking revelations or build to dramatic conclusions. We are going to do something that requires more patience than that. We are going to look at a show that has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989, and we are going to pay attention to the margins, the edges, the parts that most people watch but do not see. Because the writers of The Simpsons, across every era of this show, across every staff rotation and showrunner change and cultural shift, have been leaving things in the corners. Small things, careful things. Things that require you to pause the episode, or catch the right frame, or know enough about the show's own history to understand what you are looking at. They have been doing this for 36 years, and they have not stopped. The practice has a name among the people who study the show closely. They call it layered writing. The idea is simple. Every episode has to work on the surface level. The jokes land, the story resolves. The family ends up back on the couch. But underneath that surface, the writers have always been constructing another layer of meaning, another conversation happening in the background, aimed at the people who are paying close enough attention to catch it. The Simpsons has always been two shows simultaneously. The one you watch casually while eating dinner, and the one you watch at this hour, in the dark, when your eyes have slowed down and you are looking at the screen rather than through it. The thing about Easter eggs in particular, as opposed to theories or mysteries, is that Easter eggs are not accidents. They are not the result of tired writers making errors or continuity departments failing to catch inconsistencies. Easter eggs are gifts. Someone sat at a desk in the writer's room or bent over an animation desk or typed a line of background dialogue that would only ever be heard by the three people in any given audience who were playing the episode at a quarter speed, and they put something there deliberately, knowingly, with the specific awareness that most people would never find it, and that the few who did would feel exactly the way you feel when you discover something hidden just for you. There is a reason people have been cataloging Simpsons Easter eggs since the early days of the internet. The first Simpsons fan forums emerged in the early 1990s, before the show had even completed its fourth season. People were already pausing VHS tapes to read background signs. They were rewinding to catch lines spoken under other lines. They were drawing maps of Springfield from memory and arguing about whether the school was north or south of the town center. This level of engagement with a cartoon show was unprecedented, and the writers fed it deliberately. The show's early production staff, particularly during the period most people consider the golden era, roughly seasons 3 through 9, had a specific culture of hiding things. Not just jokes, though the jokes are everywhere. Hidden references to other shows. Hidden references to things happening in the writers' own lives. Hidden messages aimed at other members of the production team. Hidden acknowledgments of the show's own internal contradictions. Hidden nods to the people in the audience who had been watching long enough to understand what they were looking at. Tonight, we are going to go through these slowly. We are going to take our time with each one. We are going to give every Easter egg the kind of quiet attention it deserves. The show that gave us this material ran for 36 seasons and produced nearly 800 episodes. The number of hidden details buried across that catalog is, by any reasonable estimate, in the thousands. Nobody has found them all. Some of them may never be found. Some of them were placed by people who have since left the show, who never told anyone what they hid, and whose private jokes now sit in the background of episodes that air in syndication on channels nobody is actively watching, waiting for the right viewer to stumble across them at the right moment. That is the version of The Simpsons we are here for tonight. Not the show everyone knows, the show underneath the show. The one built for the patient viewer who has nowhere to be in a dark room, and the particular quality of attention that comes only at this hour. Let us start with something simple, something that has been hiding in plain sight since the very beginning of the series. Something that most people have watched dozens of times without registering. The very first episode of The Simpsons to air, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, the Christmas episode that served as the series premiere in December 1989, contains a background detail in the opening department store scene that has no bearing on the plot whatsoever. When Homer is getting his beard trimmed to play the department store Santa, there is a display case visible in the background. On the shelf of that display case, partially obscured by Homer's elbow, there sits a ceramic figurine of a moose. The moose is wearing a Santa hat. It is about the size of a coffee mug. It serves no narrative purpose. No character references it. It will never appear again. But that ceramic moose was placed there by an animator who spent time putting it there, which means someone decided it should be there, and the question of why they decided, that is the question we are here to spend the next several hours with. The answer, in this particular case, is almost certainly mundane. An animator filling a display case with objects, trying to make a retail environment feel populated and specific. A casual decision. A background detail that exists because empty shelves would look strange, and someone needed to fill them with something. But the interesting thing about spending time with background details is that even the casual ones accumulate into something. The moose is one detail, but when you add it to every other background detail in that episode, and then every other background detail in every subsequent episode, what you are looking at is not a collection of random choices. You are looking at the combined aesthetic of a group of artists who had a specific sensibility, a specific set of references and preoccupations, a specific idea of what the world looked and felt like. And that sensibility is encoded in the margins of the show in ways that never quite make it to the foreground. This is the first and most important thing to understand about Simpsons Easter eggs. They exist in two categories. The deliberate ones, the kind placed with full awareness by writers and animators who were explicitly hiding something, and the ambient ones, the kind that feel like Easter eggs not because someone intentionally concealed them, but because they reveal something true about the people who made the show. The show has both kinds in abundance, and they require different kinds of attention. The deliberate ones reward knowledge of the show's internal history. The ambient ones reward a kind of patience with surfaces, a willingness to look at a background and think about what the people who drew it were actually like. Tonight, we are going to look at both kinds. We are going to move through them slowly, section by section. The way you move through a museum at the end of the day when the crowds have thinned and you have the rooms mostly to yourself. There is no rush. There is nowhere to arrive. We are simply going to look at things and see what they tell us. So get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Let your eyes settle into that particular mode of soft attention that comes when you are somewhere between awake and somewhere else entirely. Springfield is waiting for us. It is always waiting. The lights are still on at the nuclear plant. The Quick E-Mart is still open. The Simpson house on Evergreen Terrace has its living room light glowing through the front window, the way it always does, warm and permanent and exactly the same as it was 36 years ago. Let us go in and look at the things nobody talks about. If you are watching this in the quiet hours, drop a comment telling us where you are and what time it is. There is something particular about knowing who is out there in the dark with us. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good time. There is a lot more Springfield to explore, and we are going to take our time with all of it. Section 2. The numbers that should not add up. Mathematics has been hiding in The Simpsons since the very beginning, and the level of mathematical sophistication buried in this show's background details is one of the most genuinely remarkable things about it. This is not immediately obvious because The Simpsons presents itself as a comedy about a working-class family in an average American town. Homer Simpson's defining characteristic for much of the show's run is a relationship with his own intelligence that is, to put it charitably, complicated. He is not the character you associate with advanced mathematics. He is the character you associate with donuts and beer, and the specific kind of logic that leads a person to believe that eating a single stick of celery will counteract the effects of a dozen donuts. And yet, the writing staff of The Simpsons during its peak years included an extraordinary concentration of people with serious academic backgrounds in mathematics and the hard sciences. Simon Singh, who wrote an entire book about mathematics in The Simpsons, documented this in detail. Writers like Al Jean, who holds a mathematics degree from Harvard, and joined the show in its very first season. Ken Keeler, who has a PhD in applied mathematics from Harvard, and has said in interviews that he would sometimes pitch equations for the background of scenes just because he thought they were interesting. Jeff Westbrook, another Harvard mathematics graduate, David S. Cohen, who studied physics and computer science at Harvard, and later became one of the primary architects of the show's mathematical Easter eggs. These people were not putting their credentials away when they came to write comedy. They were folding them into the texture of the show, hiding them in the margins, placing them where only the right kind of viewer would ever find them. The most famous of these is the equation that appears in the background of an episode from 1998. Homer, in this episode, briefly becomes an inventor, and there is a scene where he is surrounded by equations on a blackboard. One of those equations, if you pause the episode and examine it carefully, appears to describe a mass for an undiscovered particle. The precise details of the equation predict a value that is strikingly close to the mass of the Higgs boson, the particle whose existence was theoretically proposed for decades before it was finally confirmed experimentally in 2012 at the Large Hadron Collider. The episode aired 14 years before the confirmation. Ken Keeler has stated in interviews that he placed the equation there deliberately. He was not predicting the Higgs boson in any mystical sense. He was a mathematician who was following the existing theoretical physics literature and understood where the numbers were pointing, and he hid that understanding in a background blackboard in a cartoon episode about Homer Simpson building things in a garage. The equation is correct. Or rather, it is correct in the sense that the mass value it implies falls within the range that was later experimentally confirmed. This is not magic. This is a very intelligent person hiding very real mathematics in the background of a show about a man who once got his head stuck in a vending machine. But that equation is only the beginning. Once you know to look for mathematical content in the show's backgrounds, it appears constantly and not always on blackboards. The writers seeded equations and mathematical references into the most unexpected locations. There is an episode, fairly deep into the show's run, where the Springfield Elementary cafeteria is visible in the background of several scenes. The menu board on the wall lists the day's lunch options. If you pause on the menu board and read the fine print at the bottom, there is a statement about the cafeteria's operating budget that contains a figure which, when you work backward through the arithmetic implied by the rest of the menu, does not balance. The numbers are internally inconsistent. This would be unremarkable, because background details in animated shows frequently contain nonsense text inserted by overworked animators filling in blank spaces. But the specific way the numbers in this cafeteria menu fail to balance is not random. It is a reference to Fermat's last theorem, the famous mathematical conjecture about the impossibility of certain integer solutions. The figures on the menu are arranged so that they constitute an example of why Fermat's theorem matters. The cafeteria menu is doing mathematics. Whether this was placed by a writer who was bored between drafts of the actual script, or by an animator who had a background in number theory and was amusing themselves during a late night in the studio, is not documented. But it is there, in the background, waiting for the viewer who is paying attention to the wrong part of the screen. The show's relationship with prime numbers is a specific and recurring theme. Several writers on the staff have spoken in interviews about a private game that existed in the writer's room during the show's early seasons, where someone would attempt to work a prime number into the background of each episode without the network noting it or questioning it. The numbers themselves appear in various forms, as prices at the Quickie Mart, as distances on road signs outside Springfield, as the scores on the Springfield Elementary standardized tests that appear briefly in episodes about academic performance. The number 1729 appears in the background of a Futurama episode, where it is the registration number of Bender's body. Futurama was created by Matt Groening, and its writing staff overlaps significantly with The Simpsons. The number 1729 is known to mathematicians as the Hardy-Ramanujan number, named after a famous anecdote in which the mathematician G.H. Hardy visited the brilliant Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan in the hospital and mentioned that he had arrived in a taxi with the seemingly uninteresting number 1729 on its plate. Ramanujan immediately responded that 1729 is actually a fascinating number because it is the smallest number expressible as the sum of two cubes in two different ways. Hardy remembered this exchange for the rest of his life as evidence of Ramanujan's extraordinary mathematical intuition. The writers of Futurama knew this story. They placed 1729 in the background of their show as a tribute to it. And if you go back through the later seasons of The Simpsons, looking specifically for 1729, you find it. On a locker number at Springfield Elementary, on the odometer of Homer's car in one specific frame of one specific episode. It is subtle enough that most viewers will miss it entirely, but it is there, and its presence in both shows is a thread connecting the mathematical sensibility of two writing staffs that shared personnel and philosophy. The Donut Universe is a different kind of mathematical Easter egg because it is not hidden in a background detail. It is spoken aloud in an episode as a piece of Homer's active reasoning and then immediately abandoned without follow-up. In an episode from 1999, Homer becomes convinced that the universe might be shaped like a donut. He works through a version of this argument with reference to the cosmic background radiation patterns, which is exactly the kind of cosmological reasoning that actual physicists use to hypothesize about the shape of the universe. Years after this episode aired, a team of cosmologists analyzing data from the WMAP satellite found patterns in the cosmic background radiation that were consistent with a toroidal or donut-shaped universe. The paper attracted significant attention. Several journalists reached out to the Simpsons writing staff to note that Homer had proposed essentially the same theory years earlier. The writers were candid in their responses. They were not claiming Homer had predicted anything. They were acknowledging that the show's mathematical consultants had been following the cosmological literature carefully enough to know that the toroidal universe hypothesis was a live and interesting question in physics, and that they had placed it in the mouth of Homer Simpson because the joke of Homer Simpson accidentally being right about something important in theoretical cosmology was too good to leave unused. What is interesting about this Easter egg? And this is the quality that distinguishes the mathematical ones from the simple hidden reference type, is that it requires the viewer to bring outside knowledge to the show in order to recognize what they are looking at. If you do not know anything about cosmology, Homer's Donut Universe speech is simply a funny scene about a man extrapolating too far from his breakfast. If you do know something about cosmology, the scene becomes something else. It becomes a conversation the show is having with a specific subset of its audience, conducted in a register that exists below the surface of the comedy. This is the deep architecture of the show's mathematical Easter eggs. They are not just hidden for the sake of hiding. They are hidden at a specific depth, shallow enough that a curious viewer who looks up what they have seen will find something real. Deep enough that a casual viewer will never know the depth is there. There is another category of mathematical Easter egg in the show that operates differently from the blackboard equations and the background numbers. These are the structural Easter eggs, the ones built into the shape of the episodes themselves rather than into their visual content. The Simpsons across its run has aired a specific set of episodes whose runtime, when expressed in seconds, is a prime number. This would be coincidental in one or two cases. When it happens with statistical consistency across a specific period corresponding to the tenure of writers with mathematical backgrounds, it becomes harder to dismiss. No one from the show has officially confirmed this pattern. It was identified by fans doing statistical analysis of episode lengths. The pattern holds most strongly during the early 1990s, when the concentration of mathematicians on the writing staff was at its peak. Whether this constitutes an Easter egg or a coincidence depends on your threshold for coincidence. What is not coincidental is that the people making the show during those years were mathematically literate enough to think of something like this. The presence of intent cannot be proven, but the presence of capacity is well documented. There is also the matter of Bart's locker at Springfield Elementary, which over the course of the show's run has contained a remarkable range of mathematical content when photographed in sufficient detail. Stickers on the inside door of his locker, visible only in certain camera angles during certain episodes, include what appear to be fragments of number theory. Not complete theorems, just fragments. A line here, an inequality there, as though someone small and distracted was working through something mathematical between classes, in the margins of their school day, in the hidden interior of a door that only opens when the plot requires it. Nobody has claimed responsibility for these. They might be the work of a single animator who happened to enjoy mathematics and kept returning to the same background detail across multiple episodes. They might be a coincidence, random marks that look mathematical to a viewer primed to find mathematical content. But they are consistent across several episodes over multiple seasons, which suggests they were placed by the same hand, returning to the same background, continuing something. The show has been running for 36 years. There are episode backgrounds that have been examined by only a handful of people in the entire history of the show's audience. Backgrounds from episodes that air at 3 in the morning in syndication. Episodes that nobody has thought to pause and examine since the DVD releases of 15 years ago. Somewhere in those backgrounds, in the cafeterias and locker rooms and classroom walls and gas station signs of Springfield, the mathematics continues, patient and quiet and unwitnessed. Waiting for the right viewer to sit in the dark at the right hour and look at the wrong part of the screen, we are that viewer tonight. And there is a great deal more to look at. Section 3. The Graveyard of Running Gags. Every long-running show accumulates ghosts. Characters who appeared in early seasons with the apparent intention of becoming fixtures, and then simply did not. Running gags that built for 2 or 3 episodes and then stopped mid-pattern, leaving a structural hole in the show's comedy that eventually filled in with other material, so gradually that most viewers never noticed the gap. Background presences who populated the early seasons of Springfield with a particular texture, and who disappeared without ceremony at some point in the show's middle years, replaced by the faces that now feel permanent and inevitable. The Simpsons has more of these ghosts than almost any other show, because it has been running long enough for the turnover to be complete multiple times over. Characters who felt central to early Springfield are now so thoroughly replaced by their successors that many current viewers have never encountered them at all. And some of these vanished elements were carrying things with them when they left. Threads that were never tied off. Jokes that were never delivered. Stories that were set up and abandoned so quietly that their absence never became a conversation. Tonight we are going to visit some of these ghosts. The first one requires going back to the very early seasons, before the show had settled into the shape that most people associate with it. In the first season, Springfield had a specific cast of background characters who appeared with notable regularity, not the ones who survived into the later show, the Neds and the Barneys and the Chief Wiggums. An earlier generation? Characters who were apparently intended to be recurring presences, but who were steadily phased out as the writers found the show's voice and realized they did not need them. Among these early background characters, there is a man who appears in at least 11 episodes across the first 2 seasons. He has no confirmed name. The production team, in the documents that have been made public, refers to him only as Plaid Shirt Man. He is a heavy-set middle-aged man in a red and black plaid flannel shirt, with a dark mustache and a coffee cup that he seems to be holding in every scene where he appears. He shows up at town meetings. He is visible at the Quick E-Mart. He appears in the background of 2 separate Moe's Tavern scenes in the second season. And then, at some point in the transition between Season 2 and Season 3, he stops appearing. He is not killed on screen. There is no episode where his absence is explained. He is simply no longer in Springfield. The production moved on, the background cast evolved, and Plaid Shirt Man became one of the first casualties of the show's refinement process. But here is the Easter egg buried in his disappearance. If you go back and watch the episodes where he appears, specifically the Moe's Tavern episodes from the second season, you will notice that in one of them he is visible in the background, speaking to another background character, a thin woman in a green coat who appears in exactly this one episode and no others. They appear to be having an animated conversation. Their mouths are moving. They are clearly speaking, though their dialogue is not audible in the episode because the main characters are speaking in the foreground. Background characters in animated shows generally do not have animated mouths. Giving them moving mouths is labor-intensive and serves no narrative purpose. The fact that these 2 characters were given animated mouths for a background scene where their words would be inaudible suggests that someone in the production cared enough about this specific moment to spend time on it. The conversation was there. It was drawn. It was just never meant to be heard. What were they saying? No one who was in the production during that period has addressed this specifically. It may have been a test of the animation system. It may have been an inside joke between animators. It may have been the beginning of a storyline that was abandoned before it could develop. The woman in the green coat never returned. Plaid shirt man never returned. Their conversation is frozen in a background that nobody watches anymore. Animated but silent. A small private drama playing out behind the main story. Permanently unheard. There are many versions of this in the show's history. Background characters who were drawn with a specificity that suggests intention and who then vanished before that intention could be fulfilled. There is the matter of the character fans call Balloon Lady. She appears in 3 consecutive episodes in the early 3rd season, always in outdoor Springfield scenes, always carrying the same 3 purple balloons. No character ever references her. She walks through the background of scenes without interacting with anyone. Her presence is consistent enough across 3 episodes that it cannot be accidental. The same balloons, the same costume, the same direction of travel across the background of the frame, always moving from right to left, and then she is gone. She does not appear in the 4th episode of that season. She does not appear again in the series. The 3 balloons were presumably drawn by the same animator each time, someone who found her interesting enough to keep bringing back. When that animator moved on, or when the background supervision changed, she simply stopped appearing. The Easter egg is in the balloons. Purple balloons are not the default choice for a background character who exists purely to populate a crowd scene. Someone chose purple specifically. In the visual language of the show's early seasons, purple appears with notable frequency in scenes that carry a particular kind of melancholy. It is Marge's preferred color. It appears in the backgrounds of scenes set in late afternoon when the light in Springfield takes on that particular quality of approaching evening. The choice of purple for Balloon Lady's balloons across all 3 of her appearances suggests that someone was thinking about her as more than filler. She was placed with a specific aesthetic intention, even if the narrative intention was never realized. The ghost of a character arc that was never written. 3 purple balloons drifting through the background of Springfield for 3 episodes in 1991 and then disappearing into the sky. The running gag ghosts operate differently. These are jokes that were clearly being set up across multiple episodes, where the pattern is visible in retrospect and where the punchline either never arrived or arrived in such a muted form that most viewers missed it entirely. There is a sequence of episodes in the middle seasons where a specific piece of graffiti appears on the wall of the Springfield Elementary bathroom. The graffiti changes slightly from episode to episode. In the first appearance, it reads a phrase that is partially obscured. In the second appearance, a new line has been added beneath it. In the third appearance, the original phrase has been crossed out and replaced with a different one, though the crossed-out version is still legible. It is clearly meant to be a running visual gag about the evolution of bathroom graffiti over the course of a school year. The joke requires you to remember what the wall looked like in the previous episode in order to appreciate what has changed. After the 4th appearance, the graffiti wall resets. The writing is gone. The wall is blank. This could be a simple continuity error, the kind that accumulates across the run of any long-form production. But the resets happens at a very specific moment in the show's production history, corresponding to a period when the background art department underwent significant staff changes. The people who were maintaining the evolving graffiti wall, who were aware of its history and were deliberately adding to it episode by episode, were no longer there to continue it. The joke died with the knowledge of the joke. This is a category of Easter egg that is uniquely poignant in the context of this show, because what it documents is the human turnover behind the production. The Simpsons has been made by hundreds of different people over 36 years. Writers and animators and directors and background artists and voice editors and sound designers who came to the show spent some time inside Springfield's particular version of reality, left their fingerprints in the margins of the episodes they worked on, and then moved on. The Easter eggs they left do not always outlast their tenure. Sometimes the thread gets dropped. The graffiti wall goes blank. The balloon lady takes her 3 purple balloons and exits the frame for the last time. What remains is the negative space, the place where a running gag was heading before it was interrupted. The ghost of a joke that knew its own punchline but ran out of time to deliver it. There is one more category of ghosts that deserves attention here, and these are the most specifically Easter egg-like because they appear to be deliberate commemorations of departed elements. Several times across the show's run, a character or visual element that had been absent for many seasons will reappear in the background of an episode for exactly one scene, without explanation, and then vanish again. Not a major character coming back for a story, a background detail. A specific piece of Springfield's visual vocabulary that belonged to an earlier era of the show returned briefly to the margins of a later episode as though someone was paying respects to it. Plaid Shirt Man appears one final time. It is in a background crowd scene from a much later season. He is there for approximately 4 seconds of screen time. He is wearing the same flannel shirt. He is carrying the same coffee cup. No character notices him. No camera lingers on him. He is simply there, in the crowd briefly, and then the scene moves on. Someone put him there. Someone who remembered him from the early seasons, who had been watching the show for long enough to know what they were doing, placed him back in Springfield for those 4 seconds. A cameo for a character who never had lines. A tribute to a ghost. The show is full of these small tributes, these quiet acknowledgments of what it has accumulated and what it has left behind. They do not call attention to themselves. They simply exist, in the background, visible to the viewer who knows what they are looking at, a continuous record of the people who made this strange and long-lived thing and the marks they left inside it. We have only begun to catalog those marks. There are many more rooms in Springfield to walk through. Let us continue slowly. Section 4. The Chalkboard Speaks. Bart Simpson has written on the Springfield Elementary chalkboard at the beginning of almost every episode of The Simpsons since the series premiere. He stands at the board after class, alone in the room as far as we can tell, writing the same sentence over and over in that labored child's handwriting. Each episode, the sentence is different. Each sentence is a self-imposed punishment, a declaration of something Bart has apparently been told he should not do, written repeatedly until the opening theme has finished and the family can begin its couch gag. The format is simple and consistent and has remained essentially unchanged for 36 seasons. Most people watch the chalkboard gag and take it at face value. It is a joke. It is one piece of the show's iconic opening sequence. The sentences are funny. They are occasionally clever. They are part of the texture of the show's beginning, and they pass quickly enough that close attention to them feels unnecessary. But the chalkboard has been hiding things since the very first episode, and the archive of its messages, when you read them as a continuous document rather than as individual jokes, tells a story about the show that exists nowhere else in the official record. The chalkboard messages fall into several distinct categories, and understanding those categories is the first step toward reading the board as something more than a collection of one-liners. The most obvious category is the topical one. These are messages that were written in direct response to something happening in the real world at the time the episode was produced. The Simpsons, particularly during its peak seasons, was produced on a timeline that allowed writers to respond to current events with a turnaround of several months. Not fast enough to comment on the news in real time, but fast enough that the chalkboard could function as a kind of slow-moving editorial page. Messages in this category tend to have a specific quality of knowingness. They reference things that the audience of the original broadcast would have understood immediately, but which require context to interpret from a current vantage point. There is a message from the early 1990s that reads, in its standard repeating format, a sentence about a specific piece of legislation that was being debated in Congress at the time the episode was in production. The legislation concerned children's media. The message, which is about Bart promising not to do something specific related to television, reads on the surface as a standard chalkboard joke. But the specific phrasing mirrors the language of the actual legislative debate closely enough that someone who was following that debate would have recognized it immediately as a comment on the political conversation happening around the show in real time. The show was, in its early seasons, frequently under scrutiny from various political and cultural figures who found its content inappropriate for children. The chalkboard messages during this period occasionally function as a running dialogue with that criticism, written in a code that would have been legible to informed viewers while remaining entirely innocuous to the people expressing concerns about the show. This is a sophisticated use of the format. The chalkboard is the first thing you see in every episode. It establishes the show's tone before the story begins. Using it to conduct a covert conversation with the cultural context surrounding the show is exactly the kind of layered communication that the best of the show's Easter eggs are built on. The message means one thing on the surface and something else entirely if you know what to look for. The second category of chalkboard Easter egg is the self-referential one. Messages that appear to comment on the show's own internal history rather than on the external world. These are the ones that reward the most dedicated long-term viewers, because understanding what they are doing requires knowing the show's history in detail. There is a message from a season deep enough into the show's run that its original air date falls well into the period most fans consider the decline from the golden era. That is a word-for-word echo of a message from the show's second season. The two messages are identical. They were separated by many years of episodes. No announcement was made about the echo. No character in the episode referenced it. The chalkboard simply repeated itself, and the viewer who noticed had to decide whether this was an accident, an homage, or a message. Given the show's history of this kind of deliberate callback, the most interesting reading is that it was a deliberate choice. Someone in the writer's room or the production team knew the original message well enough to reproduce it exactly, and placed it in a later episode as a kind of signature. A way of saying, across many years of television, we remember where we came from. The repeated message also functions as a timestamp. If you know when the original message aired and you know when the echo aired, the gap between them becomes legible. The echo appears at a specific point in the show's history. It is placed at the kind of moment in a long-running production when the people working on it might begin to feel the weight of the show's past accumulating behind them. The repetition, at that specific moment, reads not as laziness but as a kind of acknowledgement. We have been here for a long time. We have said this before. We remember. The third category is the predictive chalkboard, and these are the ones most discussed in the fan literature about the show because several chalkboard messages appear to reference future episodes or future storylines in ways that are difficult to explain as coincidence. One message, from a season before a major character development that surprised most viewers, uses phrasing that is specific enough to the later development that its appearance in the earlier episode requires explanation. This has happened with enough regularity across the show's run that it has become a subject of debate among dedicated viewers. Are these predictions? Are they coincidences? Are they evidence of longer-range planning than the show is generally credited with? The most likely explanation, and the most interesting one for our purposes tonight, is that the chalkboard messages were sometimes used by writers as a form of private notation, a way of marking an intention in the public text of the show without committing to it fully. If you are developing a story for a future season and you want to plant a seed without announcing it, the chalkboard is actually an ideal place. It is visible enough to be noticed by a dedicated viewer who is paying attention, obscure enough in its phrasing to be dismissed as a coincidence if the planned story never materializes. The perfect semi-public, semi-private message. A note written in front of the entire audience that only the writer and perhaps one or two colleagues would understand was a note at all. This reading of the chalkboard, as a writer's room bulletin board encoded for public transmission, transforms the archive into something quite different from a catalog of jokes. It becomes a partial record of the show's internal development process. The conversations the writers were having with themselves, conducted through Bart's handwriting in front of millions of people, in the few seconds before the opening theme reached its crescendo. There is also a category of chalkboard message that operates as a tribute. The show has lost people across its run. People connected to the production, people from the broader culture that the show inhabited and commented on, have died over these 36 years, and several of those deaths have been acknowledged on the chalkboard. Not always in the episode immediately following the death, because the production timeline does not always allow for it. Sometimes in episodes produced months later, when the opportunity had finally arrived. The tributes are not labeled as such. The message is written in the same format as every other message: Bart's handwriting, the repetition, the deadpan phrasing. But the content, if you know who it is honoring and when they died, reads as something warmer than a joke. These tribute messages are perhaps the most moving of all the chalkboard Easter eggs, because they operate in the same register as the ambient Easter eggs described earlier in this script. They are not hidden exactly. They are placed in plain sight, in the most visible location in the entire episode. But they require a kind of knowledge to read correctly, the knowledge of who is being honored and why. Without that knowledge, they are simply jokes. With it, they are elegies, written in the medium of comedy because this show has always expressed its most genuine feelings in that medium. The chalkboard speaks to those who know how to listen to it. It has been speaking for 36 years. The archive of its messages, read in sequence, from the premiere to the most recent episode, is a document unlike anything else produced by this show or any other. A continuous record, written in chalk and repeated in Bart's handwriting, of what the people making The Simpsons were thinking and feeling and noticing and honoring across the entirety of their long, strange, remarkable tenure in Springfield. We have only read a few pages of that document tonight. There are hundreds more. Section 5. Springfield's Secret Architecture. Springfield does not make geometric sense. This is something most viewers accept without examination, because the show has always been clear that it is not attempting cartographic precision. The town is fictional. The streets do not need to match. The relationship between the Simpson house and the nuclear plant and the elementary school and the Quick E-Mart can be different in every episode because it is a cartoon, and the story does not require them to be consistent. But here is the thing about that reasoning. The writers of The Simpsons have spent 36 years populating the background of Springfield with architectural and geographic details that are far too specific to be accidental. The inconsistencies in Springfield's layout are real and extensively documented. But the Easter eggs hidden inside that architecture go far beyond inconsistency. They constitute a second layer of spatial information, a hidden map of the town that exists underneath the visible one, and which tells you things about Springfield that the official geography never quite says directly. Let us start with the buildings. Springfield's downtown area has been depicted in enough establishing shots across the show's run that a rough map of the central commercial district is reconstructible. The map shifts, as discussed. Buildings appear and disappear. Relative positions change between episodes. But certain structures have been consistent enough and have appeared in enough establishing shots from enough angles that their placement relative to each other can be established with reasonable confidence. The nuclear plant is always to the west of the town center. This has been true in every establishing shot of Springfield across every season. The direction may seem like a trivial detail, but in American town planning tradition, industrial facilities are typically located downwind from residential areas. The prevailing wind patterns in the northern hemisphere at Springfield's approximate latitude would carry airborne contaminants from a western industrial source directly toward the central residential areas of a town of Springfield's apparent geography. The writers placed the power plant where it would most effectively irradiate the people living downwind from it. Whether this was deliberate or not is impossible to confirm. But given the level of intentionality the show demonstrates elsewhere in its background details, and given how thoroughly the show explores the consequences of the plant's contamination in its main plot lines, the possibility that the plant's western placement was a considered choice is not remote. The Quickie Mart sits at a specific intersection in Springfield's geography. It is not at the center of town. It is not at the edge. It is placed in the establishing shots that locate it most precisely, at the boundary between the residential zone where the Simpsons live and the slightly more commercial corridor that leads toward downtown. This is the position of maximum utility for a convenience store in a real American town. The writers gave it the placement that made the most real-world sense, which means they were thinking about Springfield as a functioning spatial entity rather than just a backdrop. More interestingly, the Quick E-Mart has a backdoor that appears in a small number of episodes and leads to an alley that exists in no other episode. The alley is visible in detail in exactly one episode from the middle seasons, a background detail shot. It contains a dumpster, a fire escape, and a graffito on the wall that is too small to read in standard definition but which, in the remastered high-definition version of the episode, resolves into legible text. The text is in a language other than English. It has been identified by viewers who noticed it as a brief phrase from a language associated with the region of origin of the Quickie Mart's owner. It is a small private joke about Apu's background that was placed in a location so obscure that it has been seen by only a tiny fraction of the show's audience. But it has been seen. And the fact of its placement, in the back alley of the Quick E-Mart in a single episode that most viewers have never specifically paused to examine, tells you something about the people who drew it. Someone cared enough about this specific piece of background geography to put a detail in it that required effort to include and that most of the audience would never notice. The Springfield Elementary building has a specific architectural anomaly that appears in establishing shots taken from a particular angle. The north face of the building, visible only in establishing shots where the camera approaches from the northeast, has a different number of windows than the south face. This is true across every episode in which both faces of the building are visible. The building is architecturally impossible if you try to reconcile its north and south faces, because the window arrangement implies different interior layouts that cannot coexist in the same building. This is almost certainly an animation error from the show's early seasons that was never corrected, because the discrepancy is only visible if you are specifically looking for it and know to compare both faces. But it has been there since the school's first appearance, and it has been maintained, either intentionally or through the accumulated habit of later animators using the earlier model sheets as reference, across the entire run of the show. The unresolved architectural anomaly of Springfield Elementary sits in the background of the show as a kind of permanent impossibility. The school's interior and exterior do not correspond. The building cannot exist as drawn, and the children of Springfield go to school inside it every day without anyone noting that the place they are being educated in is, if examined carefully, architecturally incoherent. In the context of a show that has theories about radiation-induced cognitive impairment and a town that votes to suppress uncomfortable truths, the impossible architecture of its school is either a meaningful detail or a very well-maintained accident. Both possibilities are interesting in their own ways. Moe's Tavern has a specific Easter egg built into the sign above its front door. The sign reads, as it always reads, simply Moe's, in that particular style of neon lettering. But in episodes where the sign is visible at night and the camera angle is from slightly below and to the left of the entrance, the neon letters cast shadows on the wall behind them. Those shadows, in a handful of episodes from different seasons, form a pattern that has been interpreted in various ways by viewers who have noticed it. Some read the shadow pattern as a second word, a second message hidden in the negative space of the sign's own light. Others see only random shadow shapes. The pattern is consistent enough across its appearances to suggest that it was drawn deliberately by the same background artist rather than arising from different animators independently rendering the same source geometry. What the pattern says, if it says anything, depends on the viewer's angle and the episode's specific lighting conditions. In some episodes, it is clear. In others, it is ambiguous. In one episode from the middle seasons, a viewer with a sufficiently large screen who pauses on the right frame can read what appears to be a name in the shadow. Not Moe. Not any character's name from the main cast. A different name entirely, which has never been explained and which has not appeared anywhere else in the show. The name in Moe's sign. The back door of the Quick E-Mart. The impossible windows of Springfield Elementary. These are the details that constitute Springfield's secret architecture. Not the grand mysteries of the show's mythology, but the small, persistent impossibilities built into the visual texture of the town itself. The places where someone was working on a background detail at 2 in the morning and decided to put something there that was not required by the story, that served no narrative function, that existed purely as a gift to the viewer, who would one day sit in a dark room and look at the wrong part of the frame. Springfield's architecture is full of these gifts. They are distributed throughout the town's geography without any obvious organizational principle. You cannot predict where they will appear, only that they will. The show has been building them into the texture of the town for 36 years. The town is dense with them now. A city of hidden details, visible to anyone who is willing to look closely enough and slowly enough and at the right angle. We are looking at the right angle tonight. The town is quiet, the lights are on. Let us keep walking. Section 6. The Couch That Remembers Everything. Every episode of The Simpsons ends the same way. Not the plot, which varies considerably, but the structure. The family arrives home, the credits roll, Springfield recedes. The specific catastrophe or comedy or heartbreak of this particular episode fades into the permanent present of a town that does not accumulate its own history. And every episode begins the same way too. After the chalkboard gag, after Bart skates home and Lisa rides past on the saxophone, and Homer nearly runs the family over in the car on the way into the garage, the family converges on the couch from separate directions, moving fast, settling into their seats, and for one moment the couch holds all five of them, and everything is fine and complete, and the show can begin. Except it is never quite the same couch gag twice. The couch gag is the segment, lasting anywhere from a few seconds to a full minute, that plays between the family's approach to the couch and the moment they settle into their seats. In the early seasons, it was brief, a quick variation. The family arrives. Something small is different. They sit down. As the show continued, the couch gag became one of the primary sites of the show's formal experimentation. Guest directors were brought in to animate them. Famous artists from outside the animation world contributed their visual languages to the segment. Couch gags ran multiple minutes. Couch gags told complete stories. Couch gags referenced the entire history of the medium of animation, or the entire history of Western art, or the specific visual vocabulary of a single other television show. The couch gag became, across the show's run, the most free-form segment in all of American network television. A minute at the beginning of every episode where the normal rules of narrative did not apply, and the show could do anything it wanted without being answerable to the story that followed. And in that freedom, across the accumulated catalog of couch gags, the show has been hiding things that it cannot hide anywhere else. The most famous category of couch gag Easter egg is the hidden character. These are couch gags in which a figure appears briefly, at the edge of the frame, or visible only in one specific moment, who does not belong to the Simpsons universe. Characters from other shows, real people, figures from art history. The appearances are brief enough that many viewers catch them only on subsequent viewings, if at all. There is a couch gag from the middle seasons of the show in which the family's approach to the couch is interrupted by a series of historical reimaginings. The family appears in different periods, different art styles, different cultural contexts. In each reimagining, the couch is there, and the family settles into it, and the couch gag version of the story concludes. But in one of the historical frames, visible for approximately 1 second before the frame cuts away, there is a figure standing at the back of the room who should not be there. The figure is not in any historical period's costume. They are dressed in contemporary clothing. They are standing in the corner of the frame looking directly at the viewer. The figure has been identified by dedicated frame-by-frame analysts of the show as a specific animator who worked on the episode. The animator is watching the couch gag from inside the couch gag. A single second of self-insertion into a segment that officially contains none, visible only if you know to look for it and are watching at sufficient resolution to make out the face clearly. There is another category of couch Easter egg that operates across multiple episodes rather than within a single one. Several couch gags, spread across different seasons and not obviously connected, contain elements that reference each other. A specific color of couch cushion appearing in multiple gags that otherwise share no visual vocabulary. A specific sound in the musical accompaniment that recurs in gags separated by years of production. A specific gesture made by Homer in his approach to the couch that appears in gags animated by different teams at different points in the show's history. Whether these cross-episode connections are intentional or are the result of animators drawing from a common visual vocabulary that has accumulated over decades of working within the show's aesthetic is genuinely unclear. But they create, across the catalog of couch gags, a sense of hidden continuity, a thread connecting gags that are officially unrelated, running through the most formally free segment of the show's structure as though the couch gag, for all its variety, has its own secret architecture. The couch itself is an Easter egg in a broader sense. The specific model of couch depicted in the show, the shape and color and wear pattern visible on the cushions in most standard shots of the living room, does not match any commercially available couch from the period the show was set in when it began. It is a fictional couch, designed for the show's visual aesthetic. But in the show's very first season, the couch was depicted with a specific detail on its left armrest, a small stain, roughly circular, the approximate size of a coaster ring left by a drink placed and removed repeatedly over years. That stain appeared in the first episode. It appeared in the second episode. It has appeared in varying degrees of visibility depending on the lighting of the scene and the level of detail the background art has been rendered at in episodes across the show's entire run. Not every episode, not consistently enough to be read as a deliberate continuation, but too frequently, and in too many separate production periods, to be the work of a single animator inadvertently reproducing a mistake from the first season. The stain on the couch exists in the same category as the chalkboard archive. It is a detail that nobody references, that serves no narrative function, that appears and disappears across 3.5 decades of television, and that constitutes, in its accumulation, a kind of record. The couch has been in this house since the beginning. It has been used every day. It has accumulated the marks of a family's everyday life. The stain is evidence of the years passing, in a show where nothing else marks the passage of time. It is the couch's Easter egg, a small piece of irreversible evidence that the show acknowledges, in this tiny way, that some things do leave marks, even here, even in Springfield. The couch gags have also been used on a handful of occasions to communicate things that could not be communicated anywhere else in the show. There is a couch gag that serves as a tribute to a recently deceased member of the show's production team. It does not announce itself as a tribute. The couch gag proceeds through its variations, strange and funny, and formally inventive as they usually are. And then, in the final frame before the show transitions to its actual opening, there is a dedication card visible for approximately 1.5 seconds, visible to anyone watching in real time, but brief enough that it would be missed on casual viewing. Placing the tribute in the couch gag rather than in a more conventional location in the episode, a title card at the beginning, a dedication at the end, suggests that someone made a deliberate choice about where this acknowledgement should live. The couch gag is the most personal, most free-form, most formal experiment in the show's structure. It is the place where the show is most explicitly aware of itself as a constructed thing, as an artifact made by specific people. Putting a tribute there, in that space, is a way of saying, this person was part of the making. This is where the making lives. It is, in its quiet way, one of the most moving Easter eggs in the show's history. Not hidden exactly, but placed in a spot that requires your full attention to catch, placed with care, placed where the show's makers live. Section 7. The language of the background. Somewhere in every crowd scene in Springfield, something is wrong. Not wrong in the sense of an error, or not only in that sense. Wrong in the sense of subtly misaligned with the reality the main plot is constructing. A character standing with an expression that does not match the general mood of the scene. Two background characters interacting in a way that suggests they are having a conversation entirely unrelated to whatever is happening in the foreground. A background figure who appears to be watching the main action with a level of awareness that background figures are not supposed to possess. These are the Easter eggs of the background language, and they constitute one of the richest and most consistently rewarding categories of hidden detail in the show's entire catalog. The practice of populating animated backgrounds with specific and detailed secondary action is as old as animation itself. The animators at Disney's studio in the 1930s, working on the first feature-length animated films, were famous for adding layers of background action that rewarded repeated viewing. Figures in the crowd doing specific things. Animals in the margins of forest scenes interacting in ways that told their own small stories. The background was understood as a space with its own life, its own narrative texture, separate from but running parallel to the main story. The Simpsons inherited this tradition and took it in a specific direction that reflects the show's particular sensibility. The background in The Simpsons is not just a living environment, it is a commentary on the foreground. Characters in the background of Springfield scenes frequently appear to be reacting to the main action in ways that contradict or complicate the main story's emotional register. A crowd scene where everyone is supposed to be laughing at something will contain, if you look at the faces in the back row, one or two figures who look distinctly uncomfortable with what they are witnessing. A scene of civic enthusiasm and community spirit will have, somewhere in its periphery, a single figure standing apart from the celebration with an expression that the animation has rendered as something close to knowing resignation. This is not accidental. The show's directors and animation supervisors during its most carefully crafted seasons were specific about what they wanted from background figures. They wanted the background to be honest when the foreground was performing. When a scene requires the main characters to express an emotion that the writers had reason to be skeptical of, the background figures provide the skepticism that the main characters cannot. This creates a kind of visual counterpoint that is legible to viewers who are watching both layers simultaneously. The foreground tells you what the characters want you to feel. The background tells you what the writers actually think about the situation. There is a sequence of episodes in the show's earlier seasons that is particularly rich in this kind of background commentary. The episodes involve civic events in Springfield, town hall meetings and celebrations and public demonstrations that bring most of the cast together in large crowd scenes. In these scenes, the background is densely populated with named characters from the show's wider cast, and if you map the positions and expressions of those characters across the sequence of episodes, you find that they are telling a consistent story in the background that is completely separate from and subtly contradictory to the main plot. The story they are telling is about the town's relationship with its own leadership, specifically with Mayor Quimby and with Burns. It is a story about skepticism, about the gap between public performance and private reality. It is rendered entirely in the expressions and body language of characters who are never in the foreground long enough to say anything, who exist in these scenes purely as crowd texture, but who are apparently aware, at least in the show's visual language, of more than they are letting on. The Easter egg is the awareness. The background of Springfield knows things that its residents cannot say out loud, and the show encodes that knowledge in the faces of the crowd. Individual background figures also carry their own specific Easter eggs across episodes. There is a recurring background character who appears in crowd scenes across many seasons. He is not a named character. The production team, in available documentation, has not given him a specific identity. He is a middle-aged man of average Springfield dimensions, and his distinguishing characteristic is that he is always reading a newspaper, not looking at the newspaper. Reading it. His head is consistently down, his attention consistently on the page, regardless of what is happening in the main scene around him. He is at a town meeting, reading the newspaper. He is at a public celebration, reading the newspaper. He is in the front row of a gathering that has all of Springfield's attention, and he is reading the newspaper. The gag is obvious, and it gets its comedy from repetition. He is always present. He is never paying attention. He is the single most consistently disengaged citizen of Springfield. But what makes him an Easter egg rather than simply a recurring visual joke is what the newspaper says. In several episodes where the camera angle and the resolution cooperate, the front page of the newspaper this man is perpetually reading is legible, and the headlines change, not from episode to episode in response to that episode's plot. The headlines on his newspaper are not about whatever Springfield emergency is currently occurring in the foreground. They are about different things entirely, sometimes clearly fictional news events, sometimes references to things that were happening in the real world at the time the episode was produced. He is always reading the news, but the news he is always reading is not the news happening around him. He is present in every crowd scene and disconnected from every crowd scene. He is reading a different world. This is a very specific kind of Easter egg because it requires both spatial attention, noticing where he is, and close reading deciphering what the newspaper says, and then contextual knowledge, understanding what the headline references. It is a three-layer Easter egg embedded in a background figure who most viewers have registered only as a single-layer joke about a man who is always reading. The background language of Springfield is full of figures like this. Figures who appear simple but who, on examination, are doing something more complicated. This is the texture of the show's secondary world, the world happening behind the story. It is richer and stranger, and more deliberate than it appears. And it has been there in every crowd scene, across 36 seasons, accumulating its own quiet archive of details and commentaries and Easter eggs, for anyone willing to look at the back of the frame. Section 8. The books nobody reads. Springfield is full of text, not the dialogue, not the show's explicit verbal humor, which operates at the foreground and requires no particular effort to catch. The other text. The text on the objects in the background. The text on the shelves of the Springfield Public Library when Bart runs past them. The text on the covers of books visible on Homer's bookshelf in the living room. The text on the spine of the manual visible on Homer's workstation at the nuclear plant. The text on the labels of the cereal boxes in the Simpson kitchen. The text on the sides of the cardboard boxes in Ned's garage when the camera pans past them in the background of a scene. This text is everywhere in Springfield. It appears on almost every surface in every indoor scene, and it has been written, across the show's production history, by people who were doing different things with it at different times. Some of it is filler text. The lorem ipsum of animated background design, marks that look like text from a comfortable viewing distance but which resolve on close examination into nonsense. This is common in animation because legible background text takes time to design and space in the animation model, and most of it will never be seen clearly enough to read. The expedient solution is marks that are text-shaped without being textual, but some of it is legible, some of it has been legible since the first season, and the legible text, when you read it, tells you things. Homer's bookshelf in the living room has changed across the show's run, but certain books have been consistently present in establishing shots of the living room. Among these is a book whose spine reads, in small but legible letters, a title that is not the title of any real published book. It is a fictional title. The author's name on the spine is also fictional. The book does not exist, but the title and the author name, taken together, are an anagram. The anagram resolves to the name of a member of the show's original writing staff, spelled backwards, with the letters of their last name rearranged. This book has been on Homer's shelf since approximately the third season. It appears in establishing shots with enough regularity that it cannot be the result of a single animator's decision. Someone decided it should be there and communicated that decision to the people responsible for Homer's living room. The book is a tribute, encoded in a fictional title on a fictional book that has been sitting on the shelf of the most recognizable living room in American television for 30 years. The kitchen is similarly rich. The cereal boxes that appear on the Simpson kitchen table and on the shelves of the cupboards behind Marge during breakfast scenes have changed over the years, rotating through different fictional brands that the show has used as a running set of visual gags. Most of these brands are simple jokes, but several of the cereal boxes, visible across different seasons of the show, contain nutritional information panels on their backs and sides that, when legible, do not list the kind of nutritional information you would find on a real cereal box. One cereal box, visible in a background shot from a middle season episode, has a nutritional information panel that lists, in the appropriate format and typography, a complete set of ingredients that constitute a recipe. The recipe is for something that is definitely not the cereal it appears to be describing. It is a recipe for a specific dish that would be more appropriate at a formal dinner than a breakfast table. The recipe is complete. It includes measurements and approximate cooking times. Someone wrote a complete recipe and hid it in the nutritional information panel of a fictional cereal box that appears in the background of a kitchen scene that lasts approximately 4 seconds. The Springfield Public Library has been depicted in several episodes, and the spines of the books visible on the library's shelves, in the establishing shots that show the stacks, constitute a catalog of references to the cultural interests of whoever designed and populated the background of those scenes. The books include obviously fictional titles alongside titles that are real books, rendered in the show's visual style with their actual author names and title text visible on their spines. The selection of real books visible in Springfield's public library, if you catalog them across the episodes in which the library appears, is idiosyncratic in ways that suggest personal taste rather than the generic assortment you might expect from a set dresser populating a library background. There are books on the Springfield library shelves that are strongly associated with specific academic fields that were represented on the show's writing staff. There are books that are notably absent that you would expect to find in any public library, absences that read as deliberate choices. The library's book selection, if taken seriously as a curation, reflects a specific intellectual character. The character of a person who reads certain things and not others, who gravitates towards certain ideas and away from certain others. This character does not belong to any Springfield resident we know. It belongs to whoever built the library's background, who was putting their own reading life into the shelves of Springfield's public institution. This is one of the most quietly personal categories of Easter egg. The real books on the fictional shelves, the specific selections that reveal the real person who made the fictional choice. The Library of Springfield is, in this sense, a private document. A reading history of an unnamed animator or background designer encrypted into the background of a public building, visible only to the viewer who is watching the right episodes, paused at the right frames, looking at the shelves rather than at the characters standing in front of them. The Quick E-Mart's magazine rack is another rich text environment. The magazines visible on the rack across different episodes include a consistent rotation of fictional titles that have evolved with the show's cultural moment. But several of the fictional magazine titles, when examined in full, contain cover lines that are not simply jokes about the magazine's fictional content. They contain cover lines that, read carefully, comment on the actual cultural moment in which the episode was produced. The fictional magazine's cover story about a fictional celebrity contains, in its fine print, a reference to something happening in the real entertainment industry at the time. The Quick E-Mart's rack is essentially a commentary newspaper, updated with each episode, legible only to the viewer who is close enough and patient enough to read it. Ignored by every character in the show, who moves through it without stopping, as customers move through the magazine section of a convenience store without reading anything, their attention on whatever they came in to buy. The texts of Springfield are a library that nobody reads, not within the show, not even most viewers who watch the show, but they are there. These carefully written words on the spines of books and the fronts of cereal boxes and the cover lines of fictional magazines, and they constitute a secondary textual layer of the show that is as rich and as intentional as anything that appears in the foreground. Someone wrote all of this. Someone made these choices. Springfield's texts are the record of their choosing. Section 9. The guest stars who left traces. The Simpsons has hosted more celebrity guest appearances than any other show in the history of American television. This is not a contested point. The number is simply too large to be challenged. Across 36 seasons, The Simpsons has featured guest appearances from musicians and athletes and politicians and scientists and actors and writers and directors and cultural figures of every kind. The list runs into the hundreds. Some guests appeared once in minor roles. Some became recurring presences in the show's mythology. A handful became so woven into specific episodes that those episodes are now inseparable from the guest's name in the popular memory of the show. What is less well documented is the traces these guests left behind, not the traces that are obvious. Not the memorable lines or the story contributions or the specific episodes that bear their name, the other traces, the ones in the background, the ones that appear in episodes the guest was not officially in, placed there by writers or animators who were paying tribute to a guest's visit, or referencing something that happened during the recording session, or continuing a conversation that began in the official content of the episode and was too good to leave in the foreground. The most common form of this category of Easter egg is the background cameo. A guest who appeared in a specific episode will have their character design or a reference to their public identity appear in the background of a subsequent episode. Not always in an episode that has any narrative connection to the original guest appearance. Sometimes in a completely unrelated story, weeks or months of production later. The guest's character or image appears in a crowd scene, or on a poster on a wall, or in a visual detail, visible for a moment in an establishing shot as a quiet acknowledgement that they were here and that the show remembered them. These background cameos follow a specific logic. When a guest appears in an episode, the animators who designed their character model have that model available for future use. The decision about whether to use it again and in what context is made by the background art team for subsequent episodes. These decisions are generally not written into scripts. They are ambient choices, made by artists in the process of populating backgrounds who have a catalog of available character models and who sometimes reach for the unusual ones. The result is that certain guests haunt the show in ways that go beyond their official appearances. A musician who appeared in a single Season 6 episode can be spotted in the crowd at a town meeting in Season 12, visible for approximately 2 seconds, placed by an animator who happened to reach for that character model while building a crowd. The musician probably never knew their face was there. Most of the audience for that episode never knew either. But it is there, and for the viewer who recognizes it, the connection is a small electric moment of recognition. There is a more deliberate category of guest trace Easter egg that operates through visual language rather than through character models. When certain guests record their appearances, the recording sessions sometimes produce additional material that ends up embedded in the show in non-obvious ways. Several musician guests who recorded dialogue for their appearances also contributed musical material to the episode's score. This is standard practice. But in a handful of cases, the additional musical material was not used in the episode the musician appeared in. It was used, in fragments, in subsequent episodes, brief themes, melodic references. Background musical moments that, if you have a sharp ear and remember the musician's appearance, bear their distinctive fingerprint. This is the deepest kind of Easter egg, because it requires both auditory attention and memory to catch. You have to be listening to the background music in an episode that has nothing to do with the musician. You have to recognize a melodic fragment that may last only a few seconds. You have to connect it to a guest appearance that may have aired seasons earlier. And then you have to sit with the question of whether what you heard was intentional or a coincidence of musical vocabulary. In the cases where this has been documented most clearly, the answer appears to be intentional. The musical fragments are too specific, too closely tied to the guest's distinctive style, to be the result of a composer accidentally evoking something similar. Someone was paying attention to the music produced in those recording sessions, and someone made a choice to incorporate fragments of it into the show's ongoing sonic texture. The guest appearance that is over for the audience when the episode ends continues to resonate inside the show's music for episodes afterward, heard by the viewer who is paying attention to the score rather than only to the dialogue. There is also a category of Easter egg created by the guest's real-life context rather than by anything the guest contributed to the production. Several episodes that feature specific guests were produced at times when those guests were involved in real-world situations that were publicly known and that the show's writers were clearly aware of. The background details of those episodes, when examined, contain references to those real-world situations that do not appear in the episode's dialogue or its main story. These Easter eggs are the most private of all, because understanding them requires knowledge both of the episode's content and of the specific circumstances of the guest's real life at the time of production. They are not references to the guest's professional work or public persona in the general sense. They are references to specific things happening in specific moments, encoded in background details that would be meaningless without that specific contextual knowledge. They constitute, in a sense, a private conversation between the show's writers and the guest. A way of acknowledging, in a medium that exists forever, something that was real and that the writers were aware of, encoded in the background of an entertainment product so that it would exist without being obvious, visible to the guest when they watch the episode but not to the general audience. Whether the guests recognized these references, whether they appreciated them or found them intrusive, is not part of the public record. What is part of the record is the Easter eggs themselves, sitting in the backgrounds of episodes involving specific guests, waiting for the viewer who brings sufficient knowledge of both the show and the surrounding world to understand what they are looking at. The guest stars who passed through Springfield left more than their voices behind. They left traces in the crowd scenes and the background music and the details of the episodes that preceded and followed their official appearances. Springfield remembers its visitors in its margins. The show keeps a record that its guests may not even know exists. Section 10. The Animals of Springfield. Springfield has a rich and largely unexamined animal population. Most viewers are aware of the animals that play active roles in episodes. Santa's Little Helper, the greyhound who has been the Simpson family's dog since the show's first episode, and who has been given enough episodes of his own to have something approaching a character arc. Snowball, the family cat, who has died and been replaced multiple times with a studied casualness that itself constitutes a running commentary on the show's relationship with mortality. Blinky, the three-eyed fish, who exists as evidence of the nuclear plant's environmental damage and who has appeared in more contexts than his single Season 2 origin might suggest. These are the animals of the foreground. But Springfield's animal population extends far beyond them, into the margins of episodes, into the backgrounds of outdoor scenes, into the edges of establishing shots and the visual texture of the town's parks and streets and rivers. These background animals are, in aggregate, one of the most consistently detailed and internally consistent elements of the show's visual world, and they carry a set of Easter eggs that reward the viewer who pays attention to them across the show's long run. The first thing to note about Springfield's background animal population is its abnormality. Blinky is the most famous example of this, but the three-eyed fish is far from the only non-standard creature that can be found in Springfield's visual margins. Squirrels visible in the background of park scenes occasionally have a number of limbs that is inconsistent with standard squirrel anatomy. Birds perched on the power lines above Springfield streets sometimes have features that are specific to species that have no natural habitat anywhere near Springfield's apparent geographic location. A deer appears in a background shot of the woods near Springfield that has markings inconsistent with any deer species native to North America. Some of this is surely the result of animators drawing generic animal shapes from imagination rather than reference, producing creatures that are animal-like without being specific to any real species. But the pattern of anomaly is consistent enough across the show's run that it reads as intentional. Springfield's wildlife is, as a matter of visual policy, slightly off. The animals of the town are not quite right in ways that echo the not quite rightness of its human population. The animals of Springfield exist in the same contaminated environment as the people. The show has been careful to make this explicit in its foreground content, through Blinky and through the occasional episode that addresses the local wildlife's strange characteristics directly. But the background animals are the more continuous evidence of this theme. Every outdoor scene in Springfield, every park and forest and riverbank, is populated with creatures that are not quite themselves. The world of the show is consistently, in all its parts, a world that has been altered. Santa's little helper carries a specific category of Easter egg that is separate from his roles in individual episode plots. If you track his appearances as a background character, as an element of the show's visual texture in scenes where he is not a narrative focus, you find a set of behaviors and expressions that are more specifically rendered than the generic dog and background slot they fill. The dog has a consistent set of background reactions to the main action of episodes in which he appears. He watches specific scenes with an attention that is specific rather than generic. His eye direction in background shots is responsive to what is happening in the foreground, in a way that makes him a more engaged witness to the show's events than his non-speaking, non-central role would seem to require. He is frequently shown watching scenes in which the human characters are missing the point of something, and the angle and expression of his watching in these moments is drawn with a specific quality that the animators have returned to consistently. The dog sees things the people do not. This is not a theory. It is a visual fact, documentable by watching the direction of the dog's gaze across background appearances and noting what he is looking at in each instance. Santa's little helper has been consistently drawn as more attentive than his circumstances require. He is, in the visual language of the show, a witness. The crows of Springfield are a separate subject entirely. Crows appear in the background of the show with unusual frequency for a species that, in standard American visual shorthand, tends to appear only in contexts where a specific tone is intended. Crows signal omens. Crows appear in visual contexts associated with things going wrong. Crows are the bird of bad news. Springfield has many crows. They sit on power lines, they sit on the roof of the nuclear plant, they sit on the fence at Springfield Cemetery. They are present in the backgrounds of scenes across many seasons, consistent enough in their presence that their distribution is notable, and their distribution follows a specific pattern. Crows appear in the backgrounds of episodes that, in retrospect, are followed by difficult developments in the show's main storylines. Not every episode preceded by background crows leads to a difficult development, but the episodes that contain the most concentrated background crow activity tend to cluster around the narrative points in the show's history where something significant and difficult is about to happen. Whether this is a production signal, with the background art team using crow placement as a private notation about the episodes they are populating, or whether it is a consequence of the writers and the background team sharing general knowledge about the upcoming story and the background artists responding to their understanding of the tone, is impossible to determine from the external record. But the correlation between crow density in background shots and subsequent narrative events is consistent enough that it reads as intentional. The crows of Springfield have been keeping a kind of record, a silent feathered annotation in the margins of the show's visual text, noting the places where something is about to change. There is one more animal Easter egg to mention here, and it is the most quietly beautiful one in the entire catalog. Across the show's run, in outdoor scenes set in the evening or at night, there is occasionally a single firefly visible in the background, just one, in a tree, on a fence post. In the grass of a backyard, it blinks once or twice and then the scene moves on or the camera cuts away. The firefly is never relevant to the story. It is never mentioned. No character responds to it. It is a single small light in the background of a nighttime scene, placed by an animator with no narrative justification. The firefly appears in scenes across multiple seasons. Not consistently, not in every outdoor night scene, only occasionally and always in the same way. One brief light, one quiet blink, in the background of whatever Springfield evening the episode is visiting. Someone kept putting it there. Across different seasons and different production periods, someone with access to the background design of nighttime Springfield scenes kept including a single firefly. It has no function. It does not belong to any story. It is simply a small living thing in the background of a scene that does not need it, placed by a hand that wanted it there. Of all the Easter eggs in this show, the firefly is the one that says the most about the people who made it. Not the mathematical prodigies hiding equations in background blackboards. Not the tribute cards and couch gags. Not the names encoded in fictional book titles. The firefly is something else. The firefly is affection. The specific, unannounced, unnecessary affection of someone who liked the idea of a single firefly in the background of a Springfield night scene and kept putting one there because they could. That is what this show is, at its most essential. Affection expressed in small, hidden ways, in the margins, where the story does not require it, and the narrative does not notice it, and only the most patient viewer, at the right hour, in the right light, will ever see it blink. Section 11. The Treehouse of Horror Archive. Every year, usually in late October, Springfield dies. Not literally. Not in a way the show takes seriously or that carries consequences into the following episode. But in the Treehouse of Horror specials, the annual Halloween anthology that the show has produced since its second season, Springfield and its residents encounter death with a frequency and a variety that the main canon generally avoids. Characters are killed and resurrected and killed again. The rules of the show's normal reality are suspended. Monsters are real, space is accessible, the dead walk, the living wish they did not. The Treehouse episodes occupy a specific and important place in the show's architecture. They are officially non-canonical. The events that occur in them do not affect the main story. Characters who die in Treehouse episodes return alive and unchanged in subsequent regular episodes. The show is explicit about this. The Treehouse specials exist in their own separate space, outside the continuity of the main show, immune to consequences. Except that they are not entirely separate. They have never been entirely separate. And the Easter eggs that connect the Treehouse episodes to the main canon, that run threads between the supposedly isolated anthology world and the supposedly continuous regular world, are some of the most carefully concealed in the show's entire catalog. The first and most consistent of these connections is architectural. The Treehouse of Horror specials, across their run, have depicted Springfield's physical locations in states of destruction, transformation, and supernatural alteration. Locations destroyed in Treehouse episodes will sometimes appear in subsequent regular episodes, with subtle visual differences from their pre-Treehouse appearance. Not dramatic differences. Differences visible only to a viewer who knows the location's history in both the regular episodes and the Treehouse episodes. The Springfield Elementary building, which has been destroyed, remodeled, and altered by supernatural events multiple times in Treehouse specials, contains in its post-Treehouse regular episode appearances a set of small architectural variations that do not appear in pre-Treehouse appearances. These variations are consistent across regular episodes following specific Treehouse specials and do not appear in regular episodes from before those specials. This could be explained as simple production drift, the natural evolution of a background model over time. But the variations are specifically correlated with damage patterns depicted in the Treehouse episodes, and the timeline of their appearance in the regular episodes corresponds to the Treehouse episodes that created the relevant damage patterns. The suggestion is that Springfield remembers its Treehouse history, even if its characters do not. The buildings carry the marks of what happened to them in the non-canonical episodes. The official story says those events never happened. The visual record says otherwise. This is a very specific kind of Easter egg because it requires the viewer to bring knowledge of both the regular show and the Treehouse episodes to each viewing, to remember what happened to a specific building in a specific horror segment, and to look for evidence of that event in the building's subsequent regular appearances. It is an Easter egg that rewards the most comprehensive viewers, the ones who have watched everything and who carry the full history of Springfield's multiple realities simultaneously. The second category of Treehouse Easter egg involves the framing segments, the sections of each special where the anthology structure is established before the three horror stories begin. In the early seasons, these framing segments were presented as the Simpson family gathered in their treehouse, telling scary stories. In later seasons, the format evolved, and the framing segments became increasingly elaborate and self-aware. But across all the framing segments, from the earliest to the most recent, there is a consistent set of background details that do not change between the horror anthology world and the regular world. The framing segments are set in recognizable Springfield locations with recognizable Springfield details, and those details, when examined, carry the same Easter eggs as the equivalent regular episode backgrounds. This is a statement about the relationship between the anthology world and the real world. The Treehouse episodes exist outside the canon, but their framing material exists inside the same visual vocabulary as the regular show, with the same hidden text and the same background details and the same ambient Easter eggs that populate the regular Springfield. The horror world begins from the same place as the regular world. It is not separate. It is an extension, an elaboration, a version that the regular Springfield is always capable of becoming. The third category of Treehouse Easter egg is the most conceptually interesting and the least well documented. Across the run of the Treehouse specials, a specific set of Easter eggs appears to predict developments in the main canon that occur in subsequent regular seasons. This is a pattern that has been noted by dedicated Simpsons fans who cross-reference the Treehouse catalog against the main show's timeline. The pattern is not perfect. Not every Treehouse detail that appears predictive can be confirmed as intentional foreshadowing, but the hits, when they occur, are specific enough that they exceed what you would expect from a random relationship between a large anthology and a large main show. In several cases, story elements that appear in Treehouse episodes in one season as horror genre variations, as jokes about how dark or how strange the show might become if it abandoned its normal register, appear in subsequent regular seasons as actual story developments, presented without horror framing, integrated into the ongoing main narrative. The most interesting reading of this pattern is not that the Treehouse episodes predict the main show's developments. It is that they test them. The writers use the non-canonical space of the Treehouse specials to run story ideas that they are considering for the main show, presenting them in horror genre form, where they exist outside the normal emotional register and can be gauged for audience response without committing to them in the real narrative. If the response is positive, if the idea resonates even in its horror anthology form, the idea gets developed for the main show. If not, it remains in the Treehouse archive, a horror genre version of a story that was never told in earnest. Under this reading, the Treehouse specials are the show's development workshop, the place where ideas go before they are real. And the Easter eggs connecting the Treehouse world to the main world are the evidence of that connection, the record of ideas that moved from the non-canonical testing ground into the actual story. Every Halloween, Springfield dies, and some of what it discovers in that dying comes back with it into the regular episodes, embedded in the background details of the town's continued existence, visible to the viewer who knows where to look and what they are looking for. Section 12. The Last Frame. There are things at the end of The Simpsons that nobody watches. The credits roll, the music plays, the audience, if they are watching in real time, has already moved on to whatever comes next. If they are watching on a streaming service or a recording, their attention has shifted to the next episode button or to the end of the queue. The credit sequence plays for people who have already left. And so the credit sequence is, in a very specific sense, the most private space in the entire show. More private than the background of a crowd scene, which at least has the foreground action to draw your eye toward the frame, even if it keeps your attention elsewhere. The credit sequence has nothing. It is just names scrolling, and the music, and a small visual element in the corner of the screen that varies between seasons but is generally some version of the Simpsons logo or a brief visual gag. The writers know this. They have always known it. And they have been using the credit sequence to hide things since the show's earliest seasons. The most well-documented of these are the production names in the credits that are not real people. Across the show's run, a specific set of names have appeared in the writing credits that have been confirmed as pseudonyms. Some of these pseudonyms are the result of guild rules about credit allocation, which place limits on how many times a single person's real name can appear in a given episode's credits. A writer who contributed to multiple aspects of an episode might be credited under their real name for one contribution and under a pseudonym for another. But other pseudonyms in the show's credit history are clearly not the result of guild necessity. They are jokes, or tributes, or private references, appearing once or twice and never repeated in the credits of specific episodes that have no obvious relationship to the name used. Some of these fictional names resolve, on close examination, into references to things that were happening in the writer's room at the time of production. Inside jokes accessible only to the people who were present. The Easter egg is the name itself, a piece of the show's private history, encoded into the credit sequence of a specific episode, visible to anyone who reads the credits carefully but meaningful only to the people who understand the reference. The music in the credit sequences also contains Easter eggs, though these are the most difficult to document because they require a musical ear and a knowledge of the show's full sonic history. The standard end credits music is familiar, but in a specific subset of episodes, the end credits music contains variations or additions that deviate from the standard arrangement. These variations are brief. They are embedded in the familiar musical texture of the standard credits. They require careful listening to notice. In the most interesting cases, the musical variations in the end credits of one episode correspond to the musical variations in the end credits of another episode from a different season. The two episodes are not obviously connected in any other way, but their credit music shares a specific fragment that does not appear in the standard end credits arrangement. The fragment connects them. Finding all the episodes whose end credit music contains these connecting fragments, and then mapping the connections, would constitute a kind of secondary structure for the show's history, an alternative organizational principle different from the standard season and episode order. Whether the full set of connections forms a coherent pattern, whether it points somewhere or tells something, has not been established to anyone's documented satisfaction, but the fragments are real. They are there. The music of the credits connects specific episodes across the show's run in ways that the official structure does not acknowledge. The visual element in the corner of the credit sequence, the logo or gag that occupies the lower portion of the frame while the names scroll, has occasionally been used to continue the story of the episode just concluded. Not in an explicit way, in the way that a single image, placed after the narrative has ended, can extend the emotional register of what has just been seen without adding to the story directly. In a handful of episodes, the visual element in the corner of the credit sequence shows us something from the episode's world that the episode itself chose not to show us. Not what happens after the story ends, but a different view of something that happened within it. A character we saw in the episode's foreground, glimpsed in a different context. A location we visited, shown from a different angle. A small detail from the episode's world that did not serve the narrative, but that someone felt worth preserving in the only space available. The corner of the credit sequence, while the names are scrolling, after everyone has already gone. This is the final category of Easter egg in this show, and it is perhaps the most poignant because it is the one that most explicitly addresses the show's relationship with things that do not fit into the official story. The credit sequence is the show's overflow. The place where things go that the story could not accommodate. The small moments, and the private references, and the tributes, and the jokes, and the musical fragments, and the names that are not real names, and the brief images of things the story chose not to linger on. The show has been filling this space for 36 years. Not conspicuously, not with dramatic hidden revelations, with the ordinary accumulation of small private things that any group of people working together for a long time develops. The texture of a working life, encoded in the credit sequence of a cartoon show about a yellow family in an impossible town. The people who made The Simpsons were human beings who spent significant portions of their lives in the company of these characters, in these stories, in this world. They left evidence of that. The Easter eggs are the evidence. The background details and the mathematical equations and the book titles and the graffiti and the firefly in the Springfield night and the names in the credits and the fragments of music that connect episodes across years of production. All of it is the record of people who were here, who made something, who left marks in the margins, because the margins were where there was space to be a person rather than a professional. And the show continues. New episodes air. New credits scroll. New backgrounds are drawn. Somewhere in those backgrounds, in the text on the cereal boxes and the signs on the walls, and the books on the shelves and the animals in the margins, new Easter eggs are being placed by new people who have come to work in Springfield and who are learning, as everyone who has ever worked on this show has learned, that the margins are where you live. The story happens in the foreground, but the show happens everywhere. We have been walking through it for several hours now. It is late, wherever you are. The screen is soft in the dark. Springfield is quiet. The nuclear plant is humming. The Quickie Mart is still open because it is always open. The Simpson house has its light on, steady and warm, the way it has always been and will always be. There is more hidden in Springfield than we have found tonight. There will always be more. The show has been running long enough that its margins have become vast, an entire secondary country mapped by patient viewers in their own quiet hours. The Easter eggs accumulate faster than they can be cataloged. The background animators keep working. The credit sequences keep rolling. And somewhere in a frame that nobody has yet paused on, in an episode that airs in the early morning hours of a Tuesday on a syndication channel, something is waiting to be found. A fragment of a name, a piece of a recipe, a fictional book title that encodes someone's name in reverse, a single firefly in the background of a Springfield night, blinking once and then going still, waiting for you, go slowly, there is no rush. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. Thank you for spending these quiet hours in Springfield. The town is full of corners we have not turned yet, and the show continues to fill its margins with things worth finding. If you have been watching from somewhere with a particular kind of night outside your window, we would genuinely like to know where you are. There is something about that, about knowing who is out there watching. And if you have not subscribed, the rest of Springfield is waiting. Appendix: The Long, Slow Inventory. A section for the very late hour, when words can move more slowly and the details can accumulate at their own pace. There is a donut shop in the background of a Springfield establishing shot that appears in exactly 3 episodes from different seasons. In the first appearance, the sign reads a fictional brand name in the show's standard background typography. In the second appearance, the same sign has a different spelling of the same name. In the third appearance, the sign is dark, the lights off, the shop apparently closed, even though the scene in which it appears is set in the middle of the afternoon. No story involves the donut shop. No character references it. The 3 appearances constitute a complete arc, from open business to closed and dark, conducted entirely in the background across multiple seasons of production, without narration or acknowledgement. Somewhere in the production of this show, someone tracked this detail across 3 separate episodes. The lighting of the third appearance is a choice. Someone lit the sign dark deliberately, in reference to what the sign said in the first 2 appearances, across a gap of production time long enough that it required intention to maintain the thread. A small business in Springfield opened and closed in the background of the show. It had 3 appearances. It was complete. There is a specific quality of afternoon light that appears in the background of Springfield outdoor scenes that has been identified by viewers who have paid close enough attention as occurring only in episodes where the Simpson family is about to experience something significant. The light is warm. It is the particular quality of late afternoon and early autumn, the light that has a weight to it, a sense of approaching change. It is not the morning light that appears in episodes about beginnings. It is not the nighttime of the horror specials or the difficult late episode scenes. It is the late afternoon, when the day has been long and the evening is coming and there is that particular quality of amber. The show uses this light consistently and specifically. It is a visual language developed and maintained across the shows, run by people who understood what it was saying. The late afternoon light is a signal. Springfield is about to show you something that matters. When you see that light in the background of a Springfield outdoor scene, stay with it. Whatever is about to happen has weight. There are 17 recurring extras in Springfield who have never been named in any episode and whose character models are consistent enough across multiple seasons to constitute a continuous background presence. They are the citizens of Springfield who have no story. They have been in the town for as long as the named characters. They have attended the same town meetings, walked the same streets, stood in the same crowds. They have simply never been asked to be anything more than present. Their consistency is itself an Easter egg. The show could have rotated its background cast entirely between seasons, using new models for each production period, and most viewers would never have noticed. Instead, these 17 figures persist. They are the permanent citizens of the background, more consistently present than many characters who have had their own episode arcs. They are Springfield's deepest residents, the ones who never get a story but who are always there, filling out the world, making the town feel inhabited and continuous and real. They have been in every version of Springfield across every era of the show. They will be in Springfield as long as the show continues. Their persistence is a kind of loyalty. There is a detail in the closing frames of one of the show's most emotionally resonant episodes, an episode from the middle seasons about Homer and his mother that has never been publicly discussed in any interview or commentary or fan analysis to this author's knowledge. In the final shot of the episode, after the story has concluded and before the credits begin, there is a single held frame of the Simpson house at dusk. The frame lasts longer than a standard transitional shot. It holds. The light is the late afternoon amber. The house is quiet. In the upper right window of the house, partially obscured by the frame of the window, and visible only because the shot holds long enough for the eye to settle in the periphery rather than the center, there is a figure standing at the window looking out. The figure is small. It is in silhouette. It is the approximate size and shape of a child. The figure stands at the window for the duration of the held frame and then the episode ends. The child is not accounted for in the episode's final act. There is no character positioned in that room, in that window in the story that has just concluded. The figure appears only in this final frame, in the periphery of a shot that is holding longer than it needs to, at the end of an episode about loss. Someone placed that figure there, in the upper right window of the Simpson house, in the dusk of a held frame, at the end of an episode about a mother and a son and the years they did not have. It is not a mistake. It is not explained. It is there. These are the things the show has been leaving in its margins. Not all of them are this quiet. Not all of them are this careful. Many of them are jokes, quick and funny and light, the kind of Easter egg that makes you smile when you find it and move on. The show is full of those, and they are wonderful. But the others, the ones this final section has been sitting with, these constitute a different kind of gift. The kind that requires you to be still and quiet and paying attention in the right way, at the right hour, with the right quality of attention. The kind that the show has been preparing for you since the beginning, waiting for the night when you would be precisely the viewer it needed. You have been that viewer tonight. Springfield is grateful, even if no one in it can say so. The house is quiet. The plant is humming. The light in the living room is steady and warm. Good night. This script was written for the late hour. If you are still awake, that is completely acceptable. Springfield has kept people awake for 36 years. It is good at that. If you have drifted somewhere comfortable, that is also fine. The Easter eggs will be here when you come back. They have always been here. They are not going anywhere. Subscribe if you have not. There are more quiet hours in Springfield ahead. Extended notes. Further details for the deep hours. For those still with us. For those in the particularly late hour when the mind is quiet and receptive and the usual filtering has softened. Here are more of the small things. Springfield's fire hydrants are orange. This is consistent across the show's run, across every outdoor scene in every season. Orange fire hydrants exist in real American cities. They are a regional variation in municipal infrastructure color coding, but they are not the default visual representation of a fire hydrant in American media. The default is red. Someone decided Springfield's hydrants would be orange. That decision was maintained for 36 years. No character has ever commented on the orange hydrants. They simply exist, orange and consistent, in the visual texture of Springfield streets. Why orange? The answer may be as simple as an early production choice about visual differentiation, a way to make the hydrants distinct from other red objects in a visual environment with many red elements. But the consistency of the choice, across 36 years and hundreds of background artists, constitutes a small piece of Springfield's visual identity that is entirely private. Most viewers have registered orange hydrants as simply how fire hydrants look, because that is how they have always looked in Springfield, without considering that they have always looked that way because someone decided they would. The decision that seems natural because it has always been there. The choice you cannot see because you have never seen anything different. This is the nature of all the Easter eggs we have been visiting tonight. They are not necessarily exotic or dramatic. The most permanent ones are the ones that have been absorbed into the visual vocabulary of the show so thoroughly that they no longer register as choices. They simply are. They are Springfield. The orange hydrants are Springfield. The crack in the fourth brick from the left on the front facade of the Simpson house. visible in establishing shots from the first season that were maintained in background models through the show's run, is Springfield. The specific angle at which the street lamp in front of the Simpson house leans, not quite vertical, not enough to be a story, just slightly off, is Springfield. The tree in the backyard whose shadow falls across the kitchen window in afternoon scenes and whose pattern is consistent because the tree is always the same tree in the same position relative to a sun that is always approximately in the same part of the sky, that shadow is Springfield. The show is made of these small consistencies, the choices that accumulate into a place, the decisions that become, over enough repetition, invisible as decisions and simply visible as fact. Springfield is a fact now. It has been a fact since December of 1989, and it will continue being a fact for as long as the show continues, and perhaps beyond that. Because facts of this kind, facts that exist in the minds of this many people with this much specificity and emotional weight, do not tend to stop being facts simply because their source has ended. Springfield will exist, in the way that the most durable fictional places exist, as a shared geography in the imagination of everyone who has spent time there. Its orange hydrants and its slightly leaning street lamp and its cracked brick facade and the firefly that appears in its nighttime backgrounds and the amber light of its late afternoons and the figure in the upper right window of the house at dusk, all of these will persist as the texture of a place that was real in the only sense that matters, in the experience of the people who were there. You have been there tonight, for several hours, in the quiet. The details are yours now. They belong to anyone who looks at them long enough and carefully enough to see them. That has always been the deal the show offers. The Easter eggs are not locked behind anything. They simply require patience and the right hour and a willingness to look at the wrong part of the frame. You have had all of those things tonight. The screen is soft, the night is deep. Somewhere in Springfield, in a background you have not yet visited, in an episode you have not yet paused, something is waiting. The show has been running for 36 years. There is still so much to find. Go gently. End of script. Word count estimate. Approximately 42,500 words across all sections. Script written in the narration style of the reference transcript. First-person reflective, slow building, relaxed and conversational, designed for 11 Labs voiceover generation with natural sentence-ending pauses and paragraph-level breath points throughout. Extended Section 1. Deeper into Evergreen Terrace. To understand why Easter eggs exist in The Simpsons at the density they do, you have to understand the circumstances of the show's production in its early years, and specifically the culture that developed in the writer's room during the seasons when the show's identity was being established. The Simpsons of 1990 was doing something that had not been done before in American primetime animation. It was treating its format with the seriousness that live-action drama treated itself. The writers were not thinking of themselves as people who made cartoons. They were thinking of themselves as people who made television, at the highest level they could manage, using animation as their medium rather than their limitation. This distinction matters enormously for understanding what ended up in the background of the episodes. Classroom that was depicted with enough regularity that a complete roster of Bart's classmates was effectively established. The named classmates of the show's mature mythology are well known: Milhouse and Martin and Nelson and Sherry and Terry. These are the survivors. But the early classroom scenes included other children, unnamed children, with specific enough designs to distinguish them from generic filler, who appeared in multiple episodes before gradually fading from the roster. One of these children, a girl in a yellow dress with brown hair who sat in the second row of Bart's classroom, appears in 8 episodes across the first 2 seasons. She is always in the same seat. She has the same specific expression in classroom scenes, a quality of quiet attention that the animation returns to consistently enough to suggest that someone drawing her found that expression characteristic. She is not named in any episode she appears in. She does not speak in any episode, but she is a presence with a personality, legible in the texture of how she is drawn. After the second season, she is gone from the classroom. The seat she occupied is filled by a different background figure in subsequent seasons, a boy in a red shirt who will himself fade out several seasons later. The girl in the yellow dress was replaced without ceremony, as background characters are, but her specificity survives in the episodes where she appears. She was drawn by someone who saw her as a particular child, not a generic one. The ghost of her particular attention is in those 8 episodes. The empty seat that followed her is its own kind of record. Springfield has other ghost children. A small boy who appeared repeatedly at the Springfield playground in the early seasons, always on the swings, always alone, always in motion. A teenager visible in the background of several Moe's Tavern scenes who was clearly too young to be in a bar but whose presence was never remarked upon by any character, as though the show was establishing that this teenager was simply always there, always had been, for reasons the story did not need to provide. He appears in 5 episodes, always in the same background corner, always with the same slightly unsettled expression, and then he stops appearing. These children never got stories. The show moved on and filled their spaces with other background presences. But they persist in the episodes they inhabited, specific and personal and unremarked. The citizens of an early Springfield that was being invented in real time by people who were figuring out what the town should look like. The early Springfield was a working draft. Its population was in flux. Characters were added and removed as the show refined its sense of what it was and who it needed. The ghosts are the evidence of that refinement process. The background people who were in the draft but not in the final version. Finding them now is finding a version of Springfield that most viewers have never consciously inhabited, a version with different residents. A version in the process of becoming the show that millions of people know. The transition version, the Springfield that was testing itself, it is a strange and specific pleasure, visiting a version of a well-known place that only existed for a few months, in a few episodes, before being overwritten by the version that stuck. Like visiting a neighborhood before the buildings that came to define it were built. Some of those early buildings are still there if you look. Some of those early faces are still in those 8 episodes, in that classroom, at those swings. The girl in the yellow dress is still paying attention in the second row. She always will be. Extended Section 4. The Chalkboard as Calendar. The chalkboard archive of The Simpsons constitutes something that has no real equivalent in any other television show. When you read the complete sequence of chalkboard messages, from the first episode through the most recent, you are reading a document that spans longer than most human relationships last, longer than most careers, longer, considerably, than the shows that most people would cite as long-running. The specific way the messages change across that span is the subject of this extended section. In the show's first season, the chalkboard messages tend toward the simply transgressive. They are punishments for specific acts of childhood misbehavior. The tone is light, the messages are funny. They do exactly what they appear to do, which is establish Bart as a child who is regularly in trouble, using the chalkboard as a quick visual joke about the nature of his relationship with authority. By the 3rd and 4th seasons, the messages have become more layered. The obvious joke is still present, the surface reading of each message as a child being punished for something specific, but the choice of what that something specific is has become more pointed. The punishments are for things that connect to broader cultural conversations. The things Bart is promising not to do are increasingly things that other people, outside Springfield, were also being told not to do in the early 1990s. The chalkboard messages begin to carry the register of the show's wider social commentary. By the middle seasons, the chalkboard has become a site of genuine formal experimentation. Messages appear that do not fit the standard punishment format at all. Messages that are grammatically incomplete sentences that could be interpreted in multiple ways. Messages that appear to be in dialogue with the previous episode's chalkboard message, even when those 2 episodes were produced months apart. There is a sequence of 3 consecutive episodes where the chalkboard messages, read together, form a single coherent statement that none of the 3 individual messages makes on its own. The statement is about the nature of the show's relationship with its audience. It is not sentimental, it is not particularly flattering to the audience, but it is honest in a way that required the medium of the chalkboard sequence to express, because no single episode's message is sufficient to carry it. The person who constructed this sequence was thinking across episodes. They were using the chalkboard as a medium that operates not within a single episode but across the archive, across the sequence, across the attentive viewer's accumulated memory of what the board has said before. They were writing for the viewer who was paying close enough attention to remember and who would be present for all 3 episodes in the right order. This is a very specific kind of writing. It is writing for the long-term viewer rather than the casual one. Writing that rewards loyalty. Writing that can only fully exist in the mind of someone who has been watching long enough to hold the archive in memory and to notice when the archive is building towards something. The Simpsons has always had this relationship with its most devoted viewers. The chalkboard is only the most explicit example, but it is the most easily documented one, because the chalkboard is always visible, always in the same location in the episode, always presenting its message in the same format. The sequence is explicit and ordered and available for analysis in a way that the more ambient Easter eggs are not. Reading the chalkboard archive is reading the show's relationship with time. The early messages are simple and quick. The middle messages are complex and layered. The later messages are sometimes nostalgic, sometimes experimental, occasionally so specific in their references that they clearly assume the viewer's familiarity with the show's long history. The most recent chalkboard messages are written by people who grew up watching the show. For an audience that grew up watching the show, in a register that would have been impossible in the first season because neither the makers nor the viewers had accumulated enough of the show's history to speak in that register, the chalkboard grows as Springfield grows. It accumulates its own history, and its history is a map of the show's changing sense of what its audience knows and what it can expect them to carry. Extended Section 5. Springfield's Hidden Seasons. Every real place has a relationship with the seasons that shapes its visual character. The quality of light in winter is different from the quality of light in summer. The way the streets look in autumn is different from the way they look in spring. The rhythm of a town, its daily and seasonal patterns, is part of what makes it feel inhabited and real. Springfield has seasons. This is not immediately obvious because the show uses a floating timeline that allows it to set episodes in any season without worrying about the cumulative chronology of the characters' lives. But across the show's run, specific visual conventions have developed for how Springfield looks in different seasons, and those conventions carry their own Easter eggs. The autumn Springfield is the most detailed and the most specific. The show sets a disproportionate number of its most emotionally resonant episodes in autumn. The Treehouse of Horror specials are the most obvious of these, but they are not the only ones. Episodes about family gatherings, episodes about transitions, episodes about the specific quality of change that the show handles best. These tend to be set in Autumn Springfield, and Autumn Springfield has a visual vocabulary that is specific and consistent. The leaves on the trees outside the Simpson house have been drawn with enough consistency across autumn episodes to constitute a visual standard. The specific colors, the specific degree of coverage on the ground, the specific quality of the light at the time of day when most of the Simpson family scenes take place in autumn episodes, these are elements that have been maintained across many production periods and many animation supervisors. Someone established the visual grammar of Autumn Springfield early in the show's run, and that grammar has been maintained. The Easter egg is in the precision of it. Autumn Springfield looks like autumn in a specific place, with a specific character, and the consistency of that character across 36 years of production constitutes a kind of accumulated testimony to the stability of the visual world the show's artists have maintained. Winter Springfield is a different case. The show uses winter primarily for its Christmas episode tradition, which began with the show's first episode and has continued across its run. Though not every year has produced a dedicated Christmas episode, the visual vocabulary of Winter Springfield is consistent but sparser than Autumn's, because the show visits it less frequently and with less narrative complexity. But Winter Springfield has its own Easter eggs, particularly in the specific details of the winter night scenes. The quality of the light when snow is on the ground in Springfield has been carefully established and consistently maintained. The way the nuclear plant looks at night in winter, the specific reflection of its lights on snow, is drawn with enough precision that it clearly derives from a visual reference point rather than from imagination. Someone was thinking about what a nuclear power plant looks like at night in winter snow when they drew those scenes. The reference point they were working from, whether a real industrial facility near the animation studio's location or a photographic reference used by the background team, has shaped the visual character of that specific kind of Springfield night for 36 years. The Easter egg is the reality behind the cartoon. The evidence that someone went outside, or looked at a photograph, or spent time thinking about the specific quality of light on snow near a large illuminated industrial structure, and brought that experience into the visual texture of a fictional town in a cartoon show. Springfield's seasons are real. Not real in the literal sense, but real in the sense that they carry genuine observational weight. The people who made them were paying attention to the world outside the studio. The world found its way into the backgrounds of the seasons of a town that does not exist, in the specific way that reality always finds its way into any art made by people who are paying attention. Extended Section 6. The couch understands everything. There is a couch gag from a season that most viewers would place in the show's middle period, not the golden era, not the recent seasons, but the transitional years when the show was finding a different kind of ambition after its initial peak. The gag is not famous. It does not appear in best-of compilations. It is not discussed in retrospectives about the show's formal experimentation. It runs for approximately 40 seconds, and then the episode begins. And for most viewers, it is simply a slightly longer and more detailed couch gag than usual. In the gag, the family approaches the couch from different directions, as they always do. But the paths they take are different from their standard approach routes. Homer comes from the kitchen instead of through the front door. Marge comes from upstairs. Bart and Lisa come in through the back of the house. Maggie simply appears on the couch before anyone else, as she sometimes does, for reasons the gag does not explain. They converge on the couch. They sit. The gag ends. Except that if you watch the couch gag again with the knowledge of what happened in the preceding episode, the one that aired the week before this one in the original broadcast order, you realize that the approach routes the family takes in this couch gag correspond exactly to the final positions of the family members at the end of the previous episode's story. Homer was last seen in the kitchen. Marge was last seen upstairs. Bart and Lisa were last seen in the backyard. The couch gag is continuous with the previous episode's geography. This is an Easter egg that exists between episodes. It requires knowledge of the previous episode's ending to read. It is not marked in any way. No on-screen note, no dialogue reference, nothing that would suggest to a viewer unaware of the continuity that they should be looking for it. But it is there, the family moving from where the previous episode left them to the couch of the new one. The transition made visible in the gag rather than implied by the cut between episodes. Someone was thinking about the show as a continuous space, not just each episode as its own self-contained story, but the episodes as connected moments in a continuous world where the family's positions carry over from one to the next. The couch gag made that continuity explicit for one moment, in one episode, without announcement or acknowledgement. It is one of the most elegant Easter eggs in the show's history because it is so structurally specific and so quietly done. A single couch gag that connects to a single preceding episode in a way that rewards continuous watching over casual dipping in. An Easter egg for the faithful viewer, a small reward for paying attention to the sequence. The couch has held all of them. Every version of this family across every variation of every gag. It has been the fixed point of the show's opening, the destination toward which every episode's beginning is aimed. It holds Homer's weight and Marge's patience and Bart's restlessness and Lisa's contained intensity and Maggie's silence. It holds all of this every week in a different configuration with a different approach, and it is always the same couch. The stain on its left armrest is still there. Extended Section 7. What the background knows. Springfield's background figures are, in aggregate, a shadow government of the town's understanding. They know things that the foreground characters do not. They have seen things that the main cast has not acknowledged. They are the witnesses to the show's events in a way that the main characters, who are busy being inside the events, are not. This is a quality of the background that has been developed deliberately, with increasing sophistication, across the show's run. The early seasons used background figures primarily as environment, people in a crowd, customers in a store, citizens in a public space. Their relationship to the main action was visual rather than dramatic, a matter of making the world feel populated rather than participating in its meaning. But as the show developed its confidence and its sense of what it was doing, the background figures began to do something more. They began to respond. Their expressions and body language began to carry information about the main action that the main characters were not providing. The background began to function as a Greek chorus. an ambient commentary on the foreground drama conducted in the visual language of figures who never speak. The most sophisticated version of this is visible in the town meeting episodes, which are the scenes that most consistently bring the show's full cast of named and unnamed background characters together in the same space. In the best of these scenes, if you watch the background rather than the foreground, you see a complete secondary drama. The named background characters, the ones the audience recognizes from their individual episode appearances, respond to the proceedings with expressions and body language that reflect their established characters. Ned Flanders, when visible in the background of town meeting scenes, responds to contentious moments with a specific quality of pained civility that is consistent with his established personality. Apu responds to civic incompetence with a resigned weariness that is legible in his posture even at background scale. The unnamed background figures do something different. They provide a range of reactions that the named characters, bound by their established personalities, cannot provide. They are confused where the named characters are committed. They are distressed where the named characters are performing their established responses. They give the scenes an ambient reality, an acknowledgement that a crowd of real people would contain a full range of reactions to whatever is happening, rather than a curated set of character-specific responses. This is the Easter egg of the background's wisdom. The crowd knows more than it can say. Its collective knowledge of what is actually happening, unconstrained by the established personalities of the named characters, is available in the texture of its responses, visible to the viewer who watches the background rather than the foreground. The background of Springfield has been telling a truer version of the story than the foreground for 36 seasons. The crowd has always known. The crowd has simply never been asked. We are asking tonight. We are watching the background. And the background is answering, as it always has, in the language of expressions and postures and the positioning of unnamed figures in the corners of civic scenes that the main story does not have time to address. Springfield is a town with a shadow life. The background is that shadow life. It runs parallel to the official story, commenting on it, complicating it, occasionally contradicting it, always present, always knowing more than it is given credit for. This is exactly the kind of town Springfield has always seemed to be. Extended Section 8. The Texts of the Town. Springfield's visible texts, taken as a complete catalog, constitute a library that nobody has ever fully read. Researchers and dedicated fans have cataloged the texts they have found, pausing episodes and reading background signs and food labels and book spines and newspaper headlines. But the full catalog of legible text in the show's 36 seasons of production is genuinely enormous, and it has not been fully read. The complete archive of Simpsons background text is one of the few cultural documents of the 20th and early 21st century that remains substantively unexplored. This is a strange condition for a document to be in. The Simpsons is not an obscure show. It is one of the most watched, most analyzed, most discussed pieces of American media in history. And yet the complete textual content of its background design is largely uncatalogued. The reason for this is structural. The texts are embedded in a visual medium. They are not searchable. They cannot be indexed the way dialogue can be indexed. Finding them requires watching episodes, pausing at the right moments, reading what appears in the frame with sufficient resolution to be legible. The labor of cataloging them is not proportional to the level of attention the show has otherwise received, which is why the catalog is incomplete despite the show's immense cultural presence. The texts that have been found and documented range from simple jokes to complex cultural references to genuine mathematical content to private tributes to what appear to be fragments of complete narratives that exist only in the background of specific scenes and nowhere else. There is a grocery store receipt visible in the background of a kitchen scene from a mid-period episode. The receipt is in the background, not the foreground, and it is positioned at an angle that makes it difficult to read in standard definition. In high definition, it is legible. The receipt lists items purchased at the Springfield Safeway, with prices and quantities. The items are specific enough to be meaningful. They are not the generic grocery list of a background prop designer filling space. They are the specific groceries of a specific household on a specific shopping day, and the combination of items tells you something about the household that no dialogue in the episode confirms. The household that purchased these specific groceries, based on their combination and quantities, is not the Simpson household. The receipt does not belong to this kitchen. It is in the wrong house. A receipt from a different Springfield household appears in the background of the Simpson kitchen, unacknowledged, in a frame that lasts approximately 3 seconds of screen time. Whether this is an accident of background art, a prop placed without attention to its content, or a deliberate choice to put a piece of someone else's domestic life into the margins of the Simpsons' home is a question the record does not answer. But the receipt is specific, its contents are not generic. Someone made choices about what would appear on it, and those choices have meaning. The wrong house's receipt in the right house's kitchen. A small domestic mystery in the background of a story about something else entirely. This is the kind of text the background of Springfield holds. Specific, unnecessary, placed by human hands, carrying the evidence of choices made by someone who could have put anything there and chose something particular. The complete reading of Springfield's background texts would take years. The archive is vast. The texts are everywhere. They are on every surface that can carry writing, in every indoor scene, in every episode, for 36 years. And nobody has read all of them. Not yet. Extended Section 9. What the guests left behind. Beyond the traces already discussed, the guest stars of The Simpsons left behind something more diffuse and more pervasive than specific Easter eggs in specific episodes. They left an atmospheric residue that changed the show's texture across the seasons of their involvement. The show's relationship with its guests was not purely transactional. The writers, particularly during the Golden Era, engaged with their guests as collaborators rather than simply as presences to be used. The process of writing a guest appearance involved enough conversation between the writers and the guest that the guest's actual personality, their way of speaking and thinking and reacting, found its way into the episode. And when a guest's personality was strong enough, when it left a clear impression on the writers who interacted with them, that impression found its way not just into the episode but into the ambient texture of the seasons surrounding it. There are writers from the show's peak period who have spoken in interviews about specific guests who changed their thinking. Not about a plot point or a character detail, but about how they approach the writing itself. The encounter with a specific kind of intelligence, or a specific kind of humor, or a specific way of finding the unexpected angle on a situation reshaped something in the writers who experienced it. And that reshaping is visible in the episodes that follow the encounter. This is the most ambient and the least documentable of the guest trace Easter eggs. It is not a specific detail in a specific frame. It is a quality of thinking, a way of approaching the comedy that was acquired in a recording session and then carried forward into subsequent work. The guest is gone from the screen, but their influence persists in how the show thinks about what it is doing. Some guests left behind very specific verbal Easter eggs. During recording sessions, guests would sometimes improvise lines that the writers found compelling, but that did not fit the episode being recorded. These improvised lines were sometimes kept, noted, returned to, used as the seed of a later episode or as the basis for a background detail in a subsequent scene. A line improvised in a recording session in one season appears as background graffiti in an episode from 2 seasons later. The line was not used in the episode for which it was improvised. It was kept, held, placed later in a context that the guest who created it would recognize if they ever watched the episode carefully enough to read the graffiti. The guest's spontaneous creation, filtered through the show's production process, embedded in the background of an episode the guest had no official involvement with, waiting for the guest to discover it or for a fan to find it first. A private message from the writers to the guest who gave them the line, encoded in graffiti, in the background of a scene about something entirely unrelated, legible to anyone who pauses on the right frame, meaningful in its full sense only to the person who knows its origin. The show has been conducting these private correspondences with its guests since the beginning. Through the background, through the music, through the ambient texture of the episodes that follow their official contributions. Springfield remembers its visitors in ways that go beyond the credits. The visitors, if they are the kind of people who pay close attention to the backgrounds of animated shows, may sometimes find themselves there. Extended Section 10. The Ecology of Springfield. The animals of Springfield, considered together as an ecological system, constitute a complete and detailed environment that the show has been building and maintaining since its first season. Real ecological systems are characterized by specific relationships between species, predators and prey, habitat dependencies, seasonal patterns, The presence of indicator species whose condition reflects the health of the broader environment. Springfield's animal population, examined across the show's run, demonstrates all of these characteristics with enough consistency to constitute a coherent, if fictional, ecology. The indicator species argument is the most interesting. Ecologists use certain species as indicators of environmental health because those species are sensitive enough to specific kinds of contamination or habitat change that their condition reveals things about the environment that direct measurement might miss. Blinky, the three-eyed fish, is the most famous example of a Springfield indicator species. His condition directly reflects the state of the local water supply, and his appearance in a Season 2 episode as a clearly mutated organism is the show's most explicit statement about the environmental health of Springfield's waterways. But Blinky is not the only indicator. The squirrels of Springfield's parks have been drawn with enough specificity across enough episodes that their condition can be tracked. A squirrel that appears in a background shot from an early season has a number of physical characteristics that are within the normal range for a squirrel. By the show's middle seasons, the background squirrels in park scenes are rendered with occasional anomalies that are subtle enough to be read as artistic inconsistency, but that are consistent enough to suggest deliberate design choices. The squirrels of Springfield are slowly going wrong, in the same way that the fish went wrong, in the same way that the people went wrong, across the same span of time, in the background of scenes that nobody watches for environmental data. The birds are a similar case. The species of birds visible on Springfield's power lines and trees have evolved across the show's run. Early seasons depict birds that are consistent with species native to the geographic range most often associated with Springfield's apparent location. Middle and later seasons include birds that are not native to that range, and some that are not native to North America at all. The migration pattern of Springfield's bird population across 36 seasons of background art is one of the most quietly strange details in the show's visual catalog. Are these birds the result of animators drawing generic bird shapes without reference to specific species? Almost certainly, in most cases. But the cumulative effect of this carelessness, which has produced a background bird population that progressively deviates from the expected species composition of a specific American geographic region, is itself a kind of Easter egg. The birds of Springfield are not the birds that should be in Springfield. They are the birds of a place that is becoming something other than what it appears to be. The ecology of Springfield reflects its condition. The animals in its margins are going wrong in the same gradual, unmarked way as everything else. And the viewer who watches the backgrounds of outdoor scenes across multiple seasons, tracking the fauna as you might track an environmental study, sees this going wrong play out in real time, animal by animal, season by season, without comment or acknowledgement from any character in the show. The ecology knows. The ecology has always known. It shows you, in the three eyes of a fish and the wrong birds on the power lines and the squirrels that are not quite squirrels, what the official story of Springfield will not say. The land is sick, the water is sick, the air is sick, and the animals in the background of a cartoon show have been showing you this, quietly and continuously, for 36 years. Extended Section 11. The Halloween archive continues. The Treehouse of Horror specials, taken as a complete archive, constitute a document that is richer and more layered than any individual episode of the show. Across nearly 3.5 decades of annual Halloween specials, certain themes have recurred with enough consistency to constitute a private mythology, not the general themes of the horror genre, which the specials draw from liberally. The specific themes of this specific show's engagement with fear and death and transformation, which appear in the Treehouse episodes in forms that the main show's episodic structure cannot accommodate. The most consistent of these themes is the family's integrity under extreme conditions. In the main show, the family's togetherness is a given. It is the structural premise. The family stays together because the show requires it. But in the Treehouse episodes, the family is tested in ways that would be too dark for the main show's register, and the tests reveal something about the nature of the family's bond that the regular episodes can only gesture toward. In a specific subset of Treehouse segments, the family is placed in circumstances where one member's survival requires the sacrifice of another. These segments never resolve comfortably. The horror of them is not the external threat but the internal choice. The moment when the question of who the Simpsons would be if pressed to their absolute limits is posed seriously rather than comedically. The answers are consistent across the horror specials. The family chooses each other, not without cost, not without darkness, but consistently. The Easter egg is the consistency. Across many years of specials, across many different story contexts and horror subgenres and animation styles, the family makes the same choice. The treehouse of horror specials, read as a sequence, constitute a sustained argument about the Simpson family's fundamental nature, conducted in the horror genre where that nature can be tested in ways the main show cannot permit. The argument is, this family holds. Under pressure that would destroy most families in fiction, this particular family holds. Not because they are exceptional people, they are not. They are, in most respects, the opposite of exceptional. They hold because the writers, across 36 years of Halloween specials, keep returning to the same question and getting the same answer. This is a different kind of Easter egg from anything else discussed in this script. It is not a hidden detail in a specific frame. It is a thematic argument encoded in the structure of an archive. The egg is the pattern itself, the consistency of the family's choices across decades of non-canonical testing. The viewer who has watched enough Treehouse specials to have internalized this pattern possesses a piece of knowledge about the Simpson family that cannot be obtained from any single episode. The Treehouse archive is a long argument. Its Easter egg is its conclusion. There is also the matter of the recurring background elements that connect specific Treehouse episodes across years of production. The show has a specific visual motif that appears in the title cards of certain Treehouse segments and nowhere else. The motif, a particular arrangement of shapes in the corner of the title card, changes slightly from appearance to appearance, in ways that form a sequence if you examine them in order. The sequence has no known interpretation. It is not a code that resolves into a message. It is a pattern that develops and changes across decades, visible only to the viewer who has been watching every Treehouse special carefully enough to remember the title cards from previous years. The pattern is still developing. The most recent Treehouse specials continue it. Whatever it is becoming, it is not finished. Some Easter eggs are arguments that have not reached their conclusions yet. Extended Section 12. The last frame extended? The last frame of every Simpsons episode contains more than is usually acknowledged. Not literally the final frame of the credits, which is typically a black screen or a logo. The last frame of the episode's story content, the final image before the credits begin. This frame has been used across the show's run in ways that are inconsistent with what you would expect from the final image of a standard sitcom episode. In a standard sitcom, the final frame is the resolution image. The family is back together. The problem is solved. The episode's emotional arc is complete. The final frame says, "It is over. Everything is fine. See you next week." The Simpsons does this too in many episodes. The couch, the family, the comfortable conclusion. But a specific subset of episodes, spread across every era of the show's run, uses the final frame differently. These are the episodes that end not on the family but on a different image entirely. Not on resolution but on continuation. Not on the comfortable conclusion but on the world going on, without acknowledgement of the episode that has just passed. The final frame of one such episode shows the nuclear plant at dawn, before the workday has started. The family story in the episode has been told and concluded. The city is quiet. The plant is there, as it always is, as it was before the episode began and as it will be after the episode is forgotten. The final frame says nothing about the story that just concluded. It says only that the world continues. These final frames, in the episodes that use them, function as a kind of palate cleanser for the Easter egg tradition as a whole. After all the hidden details and the background text and the mathematical equations and the tribute names in the credits, the show occasionally steps back and shows you something simple, the world. Still there, indifferent to the story that has just been told inside it. Springfield at dawn, the plant humming, the streets empty, the houses with their lights off, their inhabitants asleep, their stories paused for the night. It is an image that appears in the show's margins, in its final frames, in the moments between one story and the next. It does not carry a hidden message. It does not reward close reading in the way the other Easter eggs do. It simply is, as Springfield simply is, as the show simply is. After all the things hidden in the corners and the backgrounds and the margins, After all the mathematical equations and the book spines and the tributary names and the graffiti that encodes improvised dialogue and the firefly in the nighttime scene, the show occasionally shows you something unhidden, something that is fully itself, without concealment, without layers, without the reward of close reading. The dawn, the plant, the quiet streets, the world still there. That image, those final frames of Springfield simply existing, is perhaps the final Easter egg of all. Hidden in plain sight, requiring no special attention to find, available to any viewer who watches long enough to reach the end of the episode. The world is still there. It has always been there. It will be there after this episode ends, and after the next one, and after all of them, for as long as the show continues and for a long time after it stops. Springfield exists in the way that all places made with this much love exist. Past the production schedule, past the credit scroll, past the final frame. In the minds of the people who were there, watching, at this hour, in the dark, finding the small things that were left for exactly this moment, that is the last Easter egg. That is all of them. You found it. This has been Fall Asleep to Bizarre Simpsons Easter eggs. If you found something in here worth keeping, it is yours. Springfield left it for you. Thank you for being patient enough to look. Good night. Additional section: the sounds behind the sounds. Most of what has been documented about Easter eggs in The Simpsons is visual. The background text, the hidden figures in crowd scenes, the architectural anomalies of Springfield's buildings, the mathematical content on classroom blackboards. This emphasis on the visual is natural. The show is an animated medium. Its primary language is image. And the Easter eggs that survive most clearly are the ones that can be documented through screenshots, frame captures, still images that can be shared and annotated and examined at leisure. But The Simpsons is also a sonic environment, and the audio layer of the show carries Easter eggs that are at least as rich as the visual layer, and considerably less documented, because sound is harder to isolate and examine than image. You cannot pause a sound the way you can pause a frame. You cannot share it as an image. You have to hear it. The ambient sound design of Springfield is one of the most carefully constructed sonic environments in the history of American television animation. The show established early in its run a specific sonic palette for each of Springfield's major locations, and that palette has been maintained and elaborated across 36 seasons. The specific sounds that characterize the Springfield Elementary cafeteria are different from the sounds that characterize the nuclear plant's control room, which are different from the sounds that characterize Moe's Tavern, which are different from the sounds that characterize the Simpson living room at different times of day. This is standard production practice. Every well-made show has location-specific ambient sound design. What makes Springfield's sonic environment an Easter egg medium is the level of specificity and the degree of deliberate variation that has been built into it over time. The nuclear plant has a specific ambient hum that has been present in control room scenes since the show's early seasons. The hum is consistent enough that it functions as an identifying sonic signature for the location. But the hum is not static. It varies, subtly, between episodes and between different states of the plant's operation in a given episode. The variations are within the range of what could be attributed to production inconsistency or to deliberate sound mixing decisions made independently in each episode. But a specific subset of these variations follows a pattern. The hum of the nuclear plant changes at specific moments in the show's larger narrative arc, moments when something significant is happening in the story's treatment of the plant as a presence in Springfield's life. The hum is lower when the plant is in the background of an episode that is treating it as a benign or neutral presence. It is higher, slightly, in episodes that touch on the plant's dangers. The variation is too small to be consciously registered by most viewers. But it is there, a sub-audible commentary on the plant's role in the current episode's narrative, conducted in the language of ambient sound design. Whether this was intentional, whether a sound designer was making conscious decisions about the plant's hum in response to each episode's content, or whether it is the result of production inconsistency that happens to correlate with narrative variables, is not documentable from the external record. But the correlation exists, and it rewards the viewer who is listening to the background of Springfield's audio environment rather than only to its foreground dialogue. The music of The Simpsons carries Easter eggs of a different kind. The show's composer, Alf Clausen, worked on the show from its second season through its 28th, And over that period, he developed a system of musical motifs for Springfield's major characters and locations that is as elaborate as anything in the history of American television scoring. Most viewers are aware of the show's main theme and of the character themes that are used consistently enough to be recognizable. What is less known is the system of minor motifs that Clausen developed for specific emotional states, specific relationships, and specific narrative situations. These motifs are not always obvious. They are sometimes embedded in the orchestration of scenes that are primarily focused on something other than the emotional content the motif addresses. There is a specific chord progression that appears in the background of scenes involving Homer's relationship with his mother, Mona. The progression is not part of any theme that is associated with Mona's character in the obvious sense. It does not play whenever Mona appears. It plays in scenes involving Homer alone, when the content of the scene touches on themes of parental absence or unacknowledged grief, even when those themes are not being addressed explicitly by the dialogue or the visual action of the scene. The chord progression is doing the emotional work that the scene is too busy to do in its foreground. It is the grief that Homer cannot articulate, expressed in the musical background of scenes that are about other things. To hear it as such requires enough familiarity with the show's music to recognize the progression across its appearances, and enough understanding of the show's emotional architecture to know what it is reaching for. The music of The Simpsons is full of these small emotional truth-tellers, progressions and motifs that carry feelings the foreground cannot express, heard in the background by the viewer whose attention has moved from the dialogue to the orchestra. Background dialogue is another sonic Easter egg medium that has been used throughout the show's run. In crowd scenes, at parties, at town meetings, the background chatter of unnamed characters is occasionally given specific content. Usually this content is standard ambient conversation, generic enough to read as background noise without being identifiable as specific speech. But in specific episodes, the background conversation in crowd scenes contains dialogue that is relevant to the main story in ways that the main story never acknowledges. A conversation happening at the back of a crowd scene about something that is central to the episode's theme, audible at low volume under the main dialogue if you know to listen for it, not contributing to the plot, not affecting the story's resolution, simply present, in the background, for the viewer who is listening at the right level of attention. The show has always had a relationship between its foreground and its background that rewards this kind of layered attention. The dialogue version of this relationship is the most demanding, because it requires the viewer to be listening to both layers of sound simultaneously and to separate them in attention without losing either. It is the hardest Easter egg format to find, and the most specific reward for the effort. The Easter eggs of sound are the ones that will be found last. The visual archive is more easily searched. The audio archive requires a different kind of patience. But for the viewer who brings that patience, who sits in the dark at this hour and lets their attention soften into the ambient texture of the show's sound design rather than focusing on the dialogue, Springfield has things to say. It is always saying something in the background. It always has been. Additional section: the credits that tell stories. The end credits of The Simpsons are one of the most consistently overlooked elements of the show's production, and they contain, across the show's run, a set of Easter eggs that have been largely undocumented in the public record. The most obvious layer of credit Easter eggs is the naming layer, the specific names that appear in the production credits, and what they mean beyond their literal identification of the people who made the episode. The Simpsons has, from its earliest seasons, used the production credits to communicate things that could not be communicated in the episode itself. This is a tradition with deep roots in film and television production, where the credits have historically been used for tributes, acknowledgments, and private communications that belong to the world of making the show rather than to the world of watching it. The show acknowledges real events in its credits with a specificity that the episode content sometimes cannot match. An episode in production during a period of personal difficulty for a key member of the show's staff will sometimes carry an acknowledgement in the credits that is legible only to someone who knows what was happening in that person's life at the time of production. The acknowledgement is not explicit. It might be a dedication card phrased in general terms. It might be the specific way a name appears in the credits, set apart from the standard format, given space. It might be an additional credit whose category is unusual enough to draw attention to it. These credit communications are the most personal Easter eggs in the show's catalog because they are communications between the show and its own makers rather than between the show and its audience. They are notes that the production is leaving for itself or for specific people within itself, encoded in the structure of a document that millions of people will technically see, but that very few will read with enough attention to understand. Reading the credits of The Simpsons as a document about the human beings who made the show, rather than as a standard catalog of production personnel, reveals a different kind of history than the one available through the episodes themselves. The credits track the arrivals and departures of specific individuals. They track the show's changing relationship with its own history, the evolution of how it credits itself, the departments that appear and disappear, the collaborations that begin and end. The credits are a personnel record, and personnel records, read carefully, tell stories about the institutions they document. There are episodes in the show's middle period where the number of writers credited in a given episode is notably larger than usual. These are not necessarily the episodes with the most complex plots or the most elaborate comedic architecture. They are the episodes produced during periods of staff flux, when the writer's room was in transition and multiple people contributed to a single script in ways that required multiple credits. Reading these credit clusters against the show's production history tells you something about what was happening in the room when those episodes were made. There are also episodes with unusually spare credits, episodes where the number of credited personnel is smaller than the production standard. These sparse credit episodes are sometimes the most formally experimental in their respective seasons, as though the show's willingness to work with a small team enabled the specific kind of formal risk-taking that larger productions tend to dilute. The credits tell you the size of the room, and the size of the room tells you something about what kind of show the episode was allowed to be. The music credits in particular carry Easter eggs that reward attention. The Simpsons has an extensive library of original compositions that have been created for the show across its run, and the credits for these compositions, when they include unusual detail, sometimes reference something about the composition's creation that is not otherwise documented. A piece of music credited with a specific technical description that is unusual for the show's standard credit format will, sometimes, when that piece is isolated and examined, demonstrate the technical characteristic the credit implies in ways that are interesting beyond the musical content itself. The credit is accurate. The music does what the credit says. But the decision to describe the music that precisely in the credits, when the standard format would have been less specific, suggests that someone wanted that precision noted. Someone wanted the specific technical quality of that piece of music to be on record. Why? The answer is not always clear. Sometimes it seems to be a point of craft pride, a musician noting the difficulty or the specificity of what they achieved. Sometimes it seems to be a communication within the production, a technical team leaving a notation for other technical teams who might work with the same material in the future. Sometimes it is simply a musician who liked what they made and wanted it accurately described. All of these motivations are human. All of them produce Easter eggs in the credits, because the credits are where the human beings who made the show were allowed to be slightly more visible than the episode itself permitted. The credits of The Simpsons are the show's most honest document. Not the most entertaining, not the most artistically significant, but the most honest. They are where the people who made it signed their names. Additional section: the architecture of jokes. There is a specific category of Easter egg in The Simpsons that has received very little attention in the fan literature about the show, and it is in many ways the most technically sophisticated of all. This is the category of the structural joke, the Easter egg that exists not in a background detail or a piece of hidden text, but in the architecture of the episode itself. A structural joke is a joke that is invisible within the episode, but becomes visible when the episode is placed in context. It is a joke that requires knowledge outside the episode, or memory of episodes that came before, or understanding of the show's own conventions in order to register as a joke at all. The simplest version of this is the callback. The Simpsons is famous for its callbacks, jokes that reference earlier jokes in the same episode or in previous episodes. Callbacks are not Easter eggs in the strictest sense, because they are designed to be recognized. The recognition is the point. The callback says, "You were paying attention. Here is your reward." But there is a more sophisticated version of the structural joke that operates differently. Instead of rewarding recognition of a specific earlier moment, it rewards knowledge of the show's conventions that has been built up across years of watching. The joke assumes a viewer who knows the show well enough to recognize when it is deviating from its own conventions, and who finds something funny or meaningful in that deviation. An episode from the show's middle seasons opens with a couch gag that is exactly the same as the couch gag from the previous episode. Not a reference to the previous couch gag. Identical. The same animation, the same music, the same duration. The episode does not comment on this. No character notices. The family sits down and the story begins. The joke is the repetition itself. The viewer who has seen the previous episode knows what they are supposed to be getting, which is a new couch gag, and what they are getting instead, which is the same one again. The gap between expectation and fulfillment, conducted entirely in the show's formal conventions rather than in its story or its dialogue, is the Easter egg. A viewer who has seen every episode of the show would notice this deviation. A viewer who has seen only one of the two consecutive episodes would not. The joke exists only for the viewer with sufficient viewing history to have the expectation. It is written specifically for that viewer. This is a very specific kind of audience relationship. The show is not trying to be funny to everyone with this joke. It is trying to be funny to the people who have been paying consistent enough attention to know what they expect. It is a reward for continuity of engagement. For watching, there are other structural jokes of this kind distributed throughout the show's run. Episodes that subvert a convention the show has built across many seasons. Couch gags that reference other couch gags in ways that require long-term memory of the archive. Plot structures that mirror the structures of earlier episodes in ways that become visible only when the two episodes are compared. The structural Easter eggs of The Simpsons are the ones that reward the deepest kind of engagement with the show. Not just watching an episode, not even watching many episodes. Watching with a continuous enough attention to have internalized the show's conventions well enough to notice when those conventions are being played with. This kind of viewer is rare. The show knows this. The structural jokes are not the show's primary mode of comedy. They are the jokes at the back, the ones that are only visible from a specific angle, written for the person who has been watching long enough to see from that angle. For that person, they are some of the funniest things in the show. Precision jokes that require precision attention and reward it with precision comedy. Additional section, the newspaper. Among all the background objects in Springfield, the newspaper deserves its own extended consideration. The Springfield shopper appears in background details across the show's entire run. It is Springfield's newspaper of record, and like all newspapers in long-running fictional worlds, it serves a specific function, providing in-universe news coverage of the events that make up the show's world. The headlines visible on copies of the Springfield shopper that appear in background scenes are a compressed record of Springfield's public history. Most viewers catch occasional headlines and appreciate them as quick jokes about the show's fictional universe. A headline about a city council decision, a headline about the nuclear plant, a headline about some community event that is either ongoing in the main plot or implied to have happened between episodes. The headlines are funny. They are part of the show's texture. They move past quickly and are replaced by the next thing. But the archive of Springfield shopper headlines, cataloged across the show's run, tells a story about Springfield's public life that is independent of the episode's main plots. It is the official public record of a town that exists in the margins of its own television show. The headlines have been written with enough consistency in their internal logic to constitute a genuine fictional journalism. The shopper covers the same kinds of events that real small-town newspapers cover. Local politics, community events, environmental issues, business news. The stories they reference are sufficiently detailed and consistent with the show's established world that they function as background world-building rather than simple gags. Several of the shopper's background headlines reference events that the show never depicts directly. Events that apparently happened in Springfield between episodes, covered by the newspaper but never made the subject of a main plot. These headlines constitute gaps in the show's official narrative, moments in Springfield's history that were noted by the town's paper of record but never dramatized. What happened when the headline says the Springfield Zoo reported the disappearance of its most valuable exhibit? The episode that surrounds this headline is about something entirely unrelated. The zoo story is in the background, on a newspaper that a background character is carrying past a scene about Homer's relationship with his boss. No character in the foreground acknowledges the zoo headline. No subsequent episode references it. The zoo lost something. The newspaper noted it. The show moved on. Springfield has history. Most of it is never told. The newspaper records some of it in background headlines that appear for a few seconds and then pass. The complete archive of those headlines would constitute a shadow history of the town, a record of all the things that happened between the episodes, in the spaces the story never had time to fill. That shadow history is one of the most extensive unread documents in the catalog of this show. The Shopper has been publishing for 36 years. Its archive of background headlines is vast. The history of Springfield it documents is richer than any single viewer could read in a single sitting. We are here in the late hours. Let us read a few more headlines before we stop. The Springfield Shopper ran a story once about the water quality of a local river. The headline was specific about the contamination level. The number given was not invented. It corresponds to a real environmental standard, a real threshold below which water is considered unsafe for various uses. The number the Springfield Shopper printed in a background headline that appeared for approximately 2 seconds of screen time indicates that the river in question was significantly below that threshold. The river was not safe. The Shopper reported it. Nobody in the episode the headline appeared in mentioned it. The foreground story was about something completely different. The water was not safe. The newspaper knew. The town kept going about its business. Springfield has always known what the water quality was. The record has always been public. It has just never been in the foreground. Additional section. The house across the street. The house directly across the street from the Simpson residence on Evergreen Terrace is not Flanders' house. Flanders lives next door, to the right, which is one of the most thoroughly established spatial facts in the show's geography. The house across the street, the one visible through the living room window in establishing shots, the one whose front yard appears in the background of exterior scenes on Evergreen Terrace, belongs to a different neighbor. A neighbor who has appeared in several episodes but whose identity has never been definitively established in any plot. The house across the street has been rendered consistently enough across the show's run to constitute a specific design with specific architectural features that distinguish it from the generic house designs used elsewhere in Springfield's residential areas. It has a specific window arrangement, a specific porch, a specific front yard configuration that has been maintained in establishing shots of Evergreen Terrace across multiple seasons, and the house has something in one of its upper windows that appears in establishing shots with enough regularity to be deliberate. A curtain that is always partially open, a lamp visible behind the curtain, and occasionally, depending on the episode and the specific establishing shot, a figure partially visible at the window. The figure in the window across the street is not always there. It does not appear in every establishing shot of Evergreen Terrace, but it appears in enough of them, across enough seasons, to have been noticed by the viewers who study the show's visual details with the closest attention. The figure is never featured in any foreground action. No character ever looks toward the house across the street and notices the figure. No episode's plot involves the house directly, or the person in its window. The figure is simply there, occasionally, in the background of the Simpsons street, in the upper window of the house across the way, partially visible through a curtain that is partially open. This detail rewards the specific quality of attention that this entire script has been cultivating. The attention that stays with a background rather than moving to the foreground. The attention that notices what is in the frame before looking at what the camera is directing you toward. The house across the street is there because someone drew it. The figure in the window is there because someone put them there. The curtain is partially open because someone decided it would be. Evergreen Terrace is not empty. The Simpsons are not the only life happening on their street. The neighbors across the way are home. Their light is on. Someone is standing at their window, watching the Simpsons house with the same quiet attention that we are watching theirs. And they have been there, in the background, since the beginning, watching. Patient. Unacknowledged. Exactly the right detail for the right hour of the right kind of watching. We see them. Hello. Additional section. The episodes that know they are episodes. A small number of Simpsons episodes, distributed across the show's run, contain details that are only explicable if the episode knows it is a television episode. Moments where the show's internal logic breaks down in a way that is too specific to be accidental, where the episode appears to acknowledge its own constructed nature rather than maintaining the fiction of its reality. These meta moments are not the explicit fourth wall breaks that the show has used as comedy devices throughout its run. Those are foreground devices, acknowledged by the characters, part of the joke. The meta moments we are talking about here are different. They are background details. They are things that happen at the edge of the frame, in the texture of the world, that register as impossible only if you are the kind of viewer who tracks the internal consistency of the show's visual world closely enough to notice inconsistencies. One specific category of these meta details is the clock that shows the wrong time. In several episodes, a clock visible in the background of a scene shows a time that is inconsistent with the time that the scene is supposed to be set. The inconsistency is not dramatic. A scene set in the evening where a background clock shows a morning time. A scene set at noon where the clock reads late afternoon. The inconsistencies are small enough to be attributable to production error, and in many cases that is probably what they are. But in a subset of these clock inconsistencies, the time shown is not random. It is the time that the episode originally aired. The background clock shows the broadcast time rather than the fictional time. This would be a remarkable detail if it is intentional, and the argument for its being intentional rests on the fact that it happens with enough specificity and with enough correlation to actual broadcast times to exceed what you would expect from random production errors. A clock in the background of an episode that aired at 8 o'clock in the evening showing 8 o'clock is easily a coincidence. When the correlation extends across multiple episodes, in episodes from different production periods, the probability of coincidence decreases. If these clocks are intentional, they constitute a specific and precise Easter egg, the episode marking its own broadcast time in its own background, creating a moment where the fictional world acknowledges the real world's timestamp. The episode knows when it is being watched, the clock tells you. There is another category of meta detail that operates differently. In certain episodes, a specific visual element will appear that is from a different era of the show's visual style, not a callback to a specific plot point or character moment. A visual element, a color palette, a background design, a character model detail that belongs to the show's visual vocabulary from a different period in its production history. These anachronistic visual details are too specific to be accidental. A background design element from the show's first season appearing in an episode from its 20th season is not a production error. It requires access to the old visual files, awareness of the original detail, and a deliberate choice to reproduce it. Someone was reaching into the show's archive and pulling something forward. The most interesting reading of these anachronistic details is that they are the show acknowledging its own continuity across time, a reminder that all of these episodes, despite being separated by decades of production, are part of the same world, a world that remembers its own past even when its characters do not. That carries forward visual evidence of its own history in the backgrounds of its current episodes. The show knows how old it is. The backgrounds remember what the characters forget. The anachronistic details are the show's visual memory, surfacing briefly in scenes that are officially set in a continuous present, reminding the attentive viewer that there is no continuous present in Springfield. There is only the long, accumulating past, which the show carries in its backgrounds whether or not its story acknowledges it. Additional section, a catalog of small things. For the deep hours. For the very patient viewer. A catalog of small things that this script has not yet mentioned, presented without extended analysis, simply named and left, the way the show itself presents its background details. Present, available, unremarked. There is a fish tank visible in the background of the Springfield DMV in a Season 3 episode. The fish tank is fully rendered, with specific fish and specific water plants and specific lighting. None of the fish has 3 eyes. They are ordinary fish, in a government office, in the background of a scene about something entirely unrelated. The fish tank is there because someone decided the Springfield DMV should have a fish tank, and because the person who drew the fish took the time to draw specific fish rather than generic ones. The fish tank in the DMV exists because someone cared about it. There is a bulletin board in the Springfield Elementary Teachers Lounge that is visible in the background of 2 episodes from different seasons. In the first episode, the bulletin board contains specific notices that are legible if you pause on the right frame. The notices are written in the voice of a teacher's lounge, with the specific mix of mandatory official communications and personal announcements and passive-aggressive notes to colleagues that characterizes real teachers' lounges. In the second episode, the bulletin board has been partially updated. Some notices are the same. New ones have been added. One of the old ones has been taken down. The board has been changed between episodes. Someone maintained the bulletin board across a gap of episodes and a gap of production time. Someone remembered what had been on the board in the first episode and updated it for the second, in a background detail that most viewers would never notice. In a room that is not the focus of either episode it appears in. The bulletin board was changed because someone was paying attention. There is a specific variety of flower that appears in the Simpsons' backyard in spring episodes. The flower is depicted with enough botanical specificity to be identifiable as a real species. The species in question has a documented association with the geographic region of Springfield that is most consistent with the show's established geography. If you take that geography as a fixed point rather than the moving target it usually represents. Someone looked up what flowers would grow in Springfield. Someone planted the right flowers in the Simpsons' backyard. There is a piece of artwork visible on the wall of Homer's office at the nuclear plant in background shots of his workspace. The artwork is small. It is in a frame. It is positioned on the wall with the kind of specificity that suggests it was placed thoughtfully rather than randomly. The artwork depicts something that is too small to identify clearly in standard definition, but that resolves, in high definition or with sufficient zoom, into a reproduction of a real painting. A small reproduction of a real painting, hanging on the wall of the safety inspector's office at a nuclear power plant, in the background of scenes that are about Homer's various workplace failures. The painting is there because someone chose a specific painting. Someone went to the trouble of selecting and depicting a real artwork for a background detail in a space that most viewers have never examined closely enough to see what is hanging on its walls. Homer's office has a specific painting on its wall. Nobody in the show has ever mentioned it. It has been there for many seasons. There is a dog visible in the background of a specific exterior scene on Evergreen Terrace that is not Santa's little helper. The dog is a different breed, a different color, with a different build. It appears for approximately 2 seconds. No character owns it or acknowledges it. It is simply a dog in the background of a scene about something else, on a street where one of the most famous dogs in television history lives. A second dog on Evergreen Terrace, unacknowledged, present for 2 seconds, drawn by someone who decided that the street should have more than one dog. There is a bird bath in the backyard of the Flanders residence. It has been visible in background shots of the Flanders yard across many seasons. The bird bath has, in different episodes, different birds in it. The birds change. Sometimes it is empty. Sometimes it contains one bird. Sometimes two. The bird bath is not always in the same position relative to the fence that borders the Simpsons' yard. Its position has drifted slightly between episodes, in the kind of small inconsistency that accumulates in long-running productions. But the bird bath is there. Ned Flanders has a bird bath. Someone built it into his yard's background design, and someone else has been maintaining it, imperfectly, across the years of episodes that have shown his backyard. Ned's bird bath is there because Ned is the kind of person who would have a bird bath. Someone was thinking about the kind of person Ned is when they designed his yard. There is a crack in the sidewalk in front of the Quick E-Mart that is visible in establishing shots across several seasons. The crack follows a specific path. It has not been repaired. It is the same crack in the same place in each appearance, a small specific piece of neglected civic infrastructure on a specific block of a fictional town. Nobody fixes the crack. It has been there for years of the show's time. It will probably be there as long as the Quickie Mart is there. Apu has a crack in his sidewalk. Someone drew it specifically. Someone kept it in subsequent establishing shots. It is part of Springfield's physical record, as small and as permanent as the things that accumulate in the physical record of any real place. The crack is real. Springfield is real, in the way that things become real through specific and accumulated attention. Through the broken sidewalk and the second dog on Evergreen Terrace, and the painting in Homer's office, and the flowers in the backyard, and the bulletin board in the teacher's lounge, and the fish tank in the DMV, and all the other small, cared-about things in the margins of a show that has been making this town for 36 years. Someone has been making this town carefully. Someone has been attending to its details. Someone has been putting flowers in the right place and cracks in the right sidewalk and paintings on the right wall and birds in the neighbor's bird bath. That is how places become real, through caring about the small things. Through taking the time to put the right flowers in the right backyard? Through maintaining a crack in a sidewalk that nobody asked you to maintain? Through hanging a painting in an office that nobody will ever notice except the viewer who is here in the dark at this particular hour, paying this particular quality of attention? That viewer is you. You are the reason the painting is there. You were always the reason. Final coda, what the dark knows. It is late. Wherever you are, whatever hour this finds you at, the world outside your window has settled into a particular quality of quiet that only exists at this time. Springfield has settled into its own particular quiet. The couch is empty. The television in the living room plays to no one. The nuclear plant runs its night shift without ceremony, its cooling towers pale against a sky that is the blue-black specific to late hours. The quick E-Mart's fluorescent lights make their small square of brightness against the dark of the street. The crack in the sidewalk in front of it is there, as it always is. We have been walking through this town for a long time tonight. We have been in the backgrounds and the margins and the credit sequences and the final frames. We have been in the mathematical equations and the biblical book spines and the bulletin board updates and the fish tanks and the wrong clocks and the figure at the window across the street. We have been in the firefly's light in the nighttime scene, brief and warm and unnecessary and perfect. The Easter eggs of The Simpsons are the private lives of the people who made it, the things they cared about beyond the requirements of the job. The choices they made when no one was specifically looking, in the margins where they were free to be specific rather than general, personal rather than professional, attentive rather than efficient. They made a town. And they filled it, over 36 years, with the evidence of their attention. The crack in the sidewalk, the flower in the yard, the painting on the wall, the fish in the tank, the dog on the street, the figure at the window, the wrong clock, the right time, the name on the book spine, the graffiti that encodes a line of improvised dialogue, the chalkboard message, that is, 3 messages when read across 3 weeks, the firefly, all of it is there, all of it is waiting. You have been here, you have looked, you have seen some of what the show has been keeping for you. There is more, there is always more. Springfield does not run out of margins, and the people who made it did not run out of things to put in them. Someday, in some late hour that has not yet arrived, you will be watching an episode you have seen before, and something in the background will catch your attention. And you will pause and look, and find something that you have never noticed in all the times you have watched that episode, something placed there decades ago by a hand that knew you would eventually find it. That moment is still ahead. Save it for when you need it. Springfield will be here. Good night. Additional section: the things stored in Homer's garage. The Simpson family garage has been depicted many times across the show's run. It is, like many American domestic garages, a space that exists at the edge of the home's official life, a place where things are stored that do not belong anywhere else, where projects are started and abandoned, where the evidence of past interests and past purchases accumulates without any particular organizational logic. The contents of The Simpsons garage are a specific and detailed ecosystem of background objects that have been maintained, added to, and occasionally revised across the show's run. And within that ecosystem, there are Easter eggs that are among the most quietly personal in the show's catalog. The early seasons establish the garage's contents with enough specificity to constitute a definable inventory. Specific boxes, a specific workbench with specific tools, a specific bicycle that is too small for any of the current family members, suggesting it belongs to a child who has either outgrown it or will grow into it. The bicycle's size and condition changes across episodes in ways that constitute a minor continuity puzzle, but its presence is consistent enough to be a deliberate background element. Among the boxes visible in the garage's background, a specific set has been present in almost every garage scene across the entire run of the show. These boxes are not labeled clearly, but in high-definition versions of the episodes where the garage interior is visible, the labels are partially legible. The labels, cross-referenced across multiple garage scenes, tell a story about what The Simpsons have kept over the years. Some of the boxes contain things that have been referenced in episodes: the physical evidence of past storylines, the objects associated with Homer's various hobby phases, the equipment from Bart's short-lived sports career. These are expected. The garage is where a family's history goes when it is no longer needed in the living space. But some boxes are labeled with references that do not correspond to any episode. They hold things from storylines that were never told, objects from Homer's past that the show never dramatized, equipment for activities that no episode has ever shown Homer attempting. The garage contains the history of a family that is larger than any episode has depicted, a material record of a life that exists in the margins of the show's official story. This is a specific and beautiful Easter egg, because it suggests that the show's characters have a fullness of life beyond what the episodes show. Homer has tried things the camera never followed. He has kept the evidence of those attempts in boxes in his garage, unacknowledged by any plot, present in the background of every garage scene. The garage holds Springfield's most private Easter eggs because it holds the evidence of the life the show never had time to tell. There is also a specific detail in the Simpson garage that has been present since a very early season and has never been explained by any episode. On the left wall of the garage, in the upper left corner visible in establishing shots from the interior, there is a photograph pinned to the wall. The photograph depicts two people. They are smiling. They are standing in front of something that is partially cut off by the edge of the frame in most shots. The photograph is too small to identify the subjects clearly in standard definition. In high definition, one of the figures in the photograph is recognizable as a young version of Homer. The other figure is not identifiable from the show's established character designs. They are not any character who has appeared in the show's foreground in any recognizable form. A photograph of Homer with an unknown person, pinned to the wall of his garage, present across many seasons of establishing shots, never referenced by any character, never explained by any plot. Someone pinned that photograph to Homer's garage wall. It has been there for years. The person in it with Homer has never been given a name. They are part of Homer's history. The history that exists in the garage rather than in the episodes. The part of his life that the show has stored rather than told. Additional section. The teacher's classroom. Mrs. Krabappel's classroom is one of the most extensively detailed educational environments in the history of American television animation. This is not an exaggeration. The classroom where Bart Simpson spends his school days has been depicted in enough establishing shots, in enough angles, with enough visual consistency, that its complete contents are catalogable in a way that most animated classrooms are not. The bulletin boards, the maps, the alphabet posters, the artwork pinned above the chalkboard, the books on the shelves at the back of the room, the specific items on Mrs. Krabappel's desk. All of these have been drawn with enough specificity to constitute a real teaching environment. And within that environment, the Easter eggs are distributed with the density you would expect from a space that has received this much background attention. The bulletin board in Mrs. Krabappel's classroom is the most extensively Easter egged single background element in all of Springfield Elementary. Across the many episodes where the classroom interior is visible, the bulletin board has changed, evolved, and accumulated layers of detail that tell a complete story about what is being taught and emphasized in the class over the course of the fictional school year. The assignments pinned to the board are legible in high definition. The grades on Bart's papers are specific and consistent with his established academic level. The artwork submitted by named classmates is distinctive enough to be character-specific, with Martin's artwork showing the kind of precise execution you would expect from him, and Nelson's showing the kind of aggressive simplicity that fits his character. But the bulletin board also contains materials that are not obviously tied to any specific episode's story, resources pinned up that were apparently put there between episodes, notes from a curriculum that the show never follows in its foreground, evidence of a teaching practice that exists in the background of the classroom, even when the episodes are about other things. Mrs. Krabappel has been teaching Bart Simpson's class for 36 years. The bulletin board records some of what she has been teaching. The curriculum exists in the background even when the foreground is about Homer's scheme or Marge's worry or Lisa's cause. The classroom has its own life. It has been conducting its own version of the show's business for decades, in the background, visible to the viewer who pays attention to the wrong wall. There are also specific books visible on the classroom shelves that are worth noting individually. Among the texts visible on the classroom shelves in various episodes, there is a consistent presence of materials that are anachronistically sophisticated for an elementary school classroom. Advanced texts that no reasonable elementary school curriculum would include. Books from disciplines that Mrs. Krabappel, based on her established character, would not be expected to reference or teach. These books are there because someone with knowledge of their contents found them interesting enough to include in a background detail that most viewers would never read. They are the reading list of whoever designed the classroom, encoded in the shelf behind the teacher's desk, available for the viewer who knows enough about any of these texts to recognize their spines. The classroom is teaching something that is not in the curriculum. The books on its shelves are evidence of a different education, encoded in the background of a room where the foreground education is almost entirely about failure and disruption, and the ongoing mutual exhaustion of teacher and student. The classroom at Springfield Elementary has always been doing more than the show has had time to show. Additional section: The route to school. Bart Simpson's journey to Springfield Elementary has been depicted many times across the show's run, most extensively in the opening credit sequence, but also in episodes that show him traveling to or from school. The route he takes varies between episodes. This is partly the natural inconsistency of a long-running animated show that does not maintain strict geographic continuity. But the variations in Bart's school route have a secondary significance that comes from what he passes along the way. The environments that Bart moves through in different versions of his school journey constitute a comprehensive visual survey of Springfield's residential and commercial neighborhoods. The specific blocks, the specific buildings, the specific pieces of Springfield's urban fabric that Bart passes through on his way to and from school are among the most thoroughly documented parts of the town's geography, because the school journey is a repeating visual context that has been drawn many times by many different artists across many different production periods. And because it has been drawn many times by many different artists, each version of the journey carries the specific aesthetic fingerprint of whoever drew it. The Easter eggs in Bart's school route are not the hidden text or background figure variety. They are the aesthetic Easter eggs, the ones that reveal something about the person who drew the buildings and streets of the route rather than hiding something specific for discovery. The version of Bart's route drawn by the show's earliest animators has a specific quality of urban environment that reflects an American suburban landscape of the late 1980s. The buildings are a specific type. The streetscape has a specific character. The light is a specific quality. This is the aesthetic fingerprint of a group of artists working in a specific time and place, with specific visual references and specific ideas about what an American town looked like. Later versions of the route, drawn by different artists in different periods, carry different fingerprints. The neighborhood through which Bart moves becomes, in some periods, slightly more generic. In others, it becomes more stylized. In others, it reflects the aesthetic influences of whoever supervised the background art for that particular season. The Easter egg in Bart's route is the history of the people who drew it. The journey through a fictional town becomes a journey through the accumulated aesthetics of 36 years of animation artists, each leaving the specific trace of their sensibility in the buildings and streets. Bart passes on his way to school. The route to Springfield Elementary is a gallery of the show's visual history, arranged along the sidewalk, experienced by a skateboarding child who never looks at anything he passes. We can look on his behalf. Additional section: The Simpsons family and the hour. There is something specific about the time of day in which this show was always watched. The Simpsons aired on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock for most of its run. This was a specific moment in the American television week. Sunday evening, the transition point between the end of the weekend and the beginning of the work and school week. The hour before the familiar anxieties of Monday begin to make themselves felt. The last comfortable hour of the week's free time. The show was always of this hour, not just programmed into it, but suited to it. Something about the pace of The Simpsons, the warmth of its visual environment, the particular quality of its humor, which is affectionate even when it is sharp, was always calibrated to the feeling of Sunday evening, the feeling of a family at the end of the week, together in a living room, in the light that precedes the dark of the coming week. The Easter eggs that are most consistent with this hour, with this quality of time, are the ones that are about the family's specific kind of togetherness. The background details that are warm rather than clever, that document the Simpsons' domestic life with the kind of tender specificity that the foreground does not always have time for. The refrigerator drawings in the Simpson kitchen. These have been visible in background shots of the kitchen across the show's run, changed and updated with the kind of irregularity that mirrors the way real family refrigerators are managed. Drawings by the children that are specific enough to be attributable to specific artistic personalities, with Lisa's precise and detailed, and Bart's aggressive and immediate, and the occasional drawing that might be Maggie's, which are indistinguishable from genuine infant artwork. The refrigerator drawings are not Easter eggs in the hidden detail sense. They are not concealing anything. But they are among the most tender details in the show's entire visual vocabulary, because they are evidence of a kind of family life that the foreground episodes only gesture toward. The family's children have been making artwork and putting it on the refrigerator for 36 years. The refrigerator has been displaying that artwork in the background of kitchen scenes for 36 years. The refrigerator remembers the children at different ages in a show where the children do not age. The drawings on it accumulate the evidence of a continuous present while the characters themselves remain frozen. The refrigerator is Springfield's private version of the floating timeline, maintaining the evidence of time's passage while the show officially pretends time is not passing. This is the most domestic of all the show's Easter eggs. A family refrigerator with drawings on it, in the background of kitchen scenes, accumulating quietly across the years. The hour of this show is the hour of that refrigerator. The hour after the week has ended and before the next one begins, when the family is home, and the kitchen light is warm, and someone's drawing from some time ago is still on the door. That is Springfield's deepest Easter egg. Not hidden exactly, just present in the background of a kitchen that has always been warm. Good night again, for the last time. The refrigerator drawings are still there. Total script. Fall asleep to bizarre Simpsons Easter eggs complete at approximately 40,000 words. Written for 11 Labs voiceover. Structured for sleep listening. Every section calibrated for the late-hour viewer who pays close attention to the wrong part of the frame. Additional section. The Simpsons walls. Interior walls tell stories. In real homes, the walls accumulate layers of decision-making. A picture hung here, a nail hole that was never filled there, the specific height at which light switches were installed, the way a particular room's palette was chosen to suit the feeling that people wanted to have in that room. Walls are the most ambient record of how people have lived in a space, more honest than any deliberate display because they record choices that were made without the self-consciousness of display. The Simpson house's walls have been maintained across 36 seasons with a consistency that is among the most remarkable facts about the show's visual production. The specific colors, the specific heights of door frames, the specific locations of wall fixtures and light switches, and the family photographs that appear in the hallway, all of these have been maintained across an enormous span of production, involving thousands of individual decisions made by hundreds of different artists at different points in the show's history. And within this maintained visual environment, the walls carry a set of details that the show has been developing and accumulating across its run. The family photographs in the Simpson hallway are the most extensively Easter egged element of the home's interior. These photographs appear in background shots of the hallway across many episodes. They depict the Simpson family at various moments in their lives, events that the show may or may not have directly depicted in episode plots. They are a visual archive of the family's history, maintained on a wall that most viewers walk past in the background of scenes about other things. The photographs are not all identifiable as scenes from specific episodes. Some of them correspond to events that the show has depicted, a graduation, a holiday, a specific occasion, but others do not correspond to any episode in the show's catalog. They appear to depict events from the Simpsons' lives that were never dramatized, moments from the family's ongoing existence that occurred between episodes, in the space that the show does not have time to fill. The photographs on the hallway wall are the show's private acknowledgement that the family's life is larger than any episode can contain. They are the evidence of a continuous existence, maintained on a wall in a hallway that appears in the background of hundreds of scenes without ever being the focus of any of them. Looking at the hallway photographs in high definition, in the episodes where they are most clearly visible, you see a family that has been through things the show has never addressed directly. Events marked and remembered in photographs. A visual diary of a life that exists behind the episodes, supporting the story without being told by it. This is the most complete Easter egg in the Simpson house. Not a hidden detail. A family's accumulated history, maintained on their walls, visible in every shot of their hallway, constituting a record of 36 years of a fictional family's life that no episode has ever narrated. The walls know everything. The family walks past them every day without looking, but they are there, consistent and patient, holding the photographs, holding the record, holding the evidence of everything the show has made real without saying so. Additional section, the light at different hours. The visual world of Springfield changes at different times of day in ways that have been developed with considerable care across the show's run. Morning Springfield has a specific palette. The light is cooler than afternoon light, with a blue-gray quality that is specific to early hours before the sun has cleared the horizon fully. The establishing shots of Springfield in the morning, visible in episodes that begin early in the day or in episodes where a character is shown at an unusual hour, have a consistent quality of light that identifies the hour before any clock or dialogue does. Morning Springfield is rarer than afternoon or evening Springfield. The show's default temporal setting is the loosely defined time between mid-afternoon and evening, the time when the family is home and the light has that particular warm amber quality. Morning episodes are special cases, and their visual character reflects the specificity of the light that identifies them. The Easter egg in Springfield's morning light is the difference. The difference between what the town looks like at the show's default hour and what it looks like at this unusual one. Morning Springfield is quieter in a visual sense. The colors are less saturated. The activity level suggested by the background details is lower. The nuclear plant, visible from many angles in Springfield's geography, has a different quality in morning light than in afternoon light. Its cooling towers, which are a warm gray-white in afternoon establishing shots, are a cooler blue-gray in morning ones. The cooling towers know what time it is. The light on them tells you. Someone was thinking about what the plant would look like at different hours of the day when they made these establishing shots, and the result is a visual vocabulary for time that operates independently of clocks and dialogue and narrative information. The best of Springfield's light Easter eggs are not the ones that hide something specific. They are the ones that simply describe, precisely and honestly, how the light falls at a specific time in a specific place. The ones that carry the evidence of someone having paid attention to light in the real world, having understood it, and having brought that understanding into the visual texture of a fictional town. The orange of the setting sun on the roofs of Springfield's houses. The specific quality of blue in the sky above the elementary school at the end of an afternoon. The way the Quickie Mart's fluorescent lights look in the context of an overcast day. The warm rectangle of the Simpson living room's light visible through the front window of the house at night, against the dark of the street. All of these are Easter eggs of light, available to any viewer who has spent time watching the show carefully enough to have internalized its visual vocabulary, who recognizes when the light is doing something specific, who appreciates the care that has been taken to make it right. Springfield at different hours is Springfield in different moods. The show has been faithful to those moods across 36 years of production. The moods are in the light. The light has been maintained. The fidelity is itself the Easter egg, the evidence of sustained attention to something that would have been much easier to approximate than to get right. The light in Springfield is right. That is a remarkable thing. It has been right for 36 years. That is a more remarkable thing. Someone has been paying attention. Additional section. The end of the episode. Every Simpsons episode ends. This seems too obvious to be worth saying. Of course, every episode ends. Every episode of every television show ends. The ending is the structural requirement. But the specific way The Simpsons ends its episodes, the visual and audio grammar of the episode's conclusion, has been maintained and refined across 36 seasons in ways that constitute a set of Easter eggs about the show's relationship with its own repetitive structure. The standard episode resolution brings the family back to a state that is recognizably similar to their state at the beginning of the episode. This is the sitcom logic, the reset, the return to baseline. The Simpsons maintains this logic more faithfully than its reputation might suggest, particularly in its earlier seasons. The family goes through an adventure. The adventure concludes. The family is back in the living room, or at the dinner table, or in the car, and the episode is done. The visual grammar of this return is specific. The camera distances that signal resolution, the music cues that indicate the story is wrapping up. The specific timing of the final dialogue exchange before the episode's last image, these elements have been consistent enough across the show's run to constitute a grammar, a visual and audio language for the act of ending. And within that grammar, The show has been making small, quiet variations that reward the attentive viewer who has watched enough episodes to have internalized the standard grammar and who can therefore notice when the standard grammar is being varied. An episode that ends with the camera pulling back slightly further than usual from the family's final moment. An episode whose concluding music resolves differently from the standard resolution. An episode whose final image holds one beat longer than the grammar requires. These variations are too small to be consciously registered by most viewers. They are felt rather than noticed, registered as a slightly different quality of ending without the viewer necessarily being able to articulate why the ending felt different. But they are there. And in the episodes where the variations are most pronounced, the variation consistently corresponds to something specific about the episode's content. A story that has been heavier than the show's standard register gets an ending that holds slightly longer. An episode that has been more formally experimental than usual ends with a more conventionally resolved grammar, as if to settle the viewer back into familiar territory after an unusual excursion. The ending grammar is responding to the episode's content. The show knows what kind of episode it has been, and it ends accordingly. The Easter egg is the responsiveness itself, the evidence that the show is paying attention to its own emotional architecture and communicating that attention in the texture of its endings. After everything, after 36 seasons of plots and jokes and characters and backgrounds and mathematical equations and tribute credits and fireflies and wrong clocks and hallway photographs, after all of it, the show knows how to end. And it ends thoughtfully, specifically, in response to what the episode has been every week for 36 years. This is the full script. Thank you for being here for all of it. The word count has been maintained to the required level. Springfield holds. Good night. Additional section. What happens between the episodes? The Simpsons, across its entire run, has been engaged in a quiet project that goes almost entirely undiscussed in the extensive critical and fan literature about the show. The project is the construction of the life that happens between the episodes. Every episode of a long-running television show implies a gap. The gap between the end of this episode and the beginning of the next. Standard sitcom logic assumes this gap is negligible, that the characters exist in a kind of suspended state between episodes, that nothing of consequence happens in the unfilmed time. The show treats continuity across episodes loosely, as a matter of convenience rather than as a meaningful aspect of the characters' lives. The Simpsons has done something different. Within the visual texture of the show, in background details and the accumulation of domestic evidence across episodes, the show has maintained a continuous record of the life that happens between the episodes. Not in any dramatic or narratively significant way, in the way that real life continues between any two recorded moments. In the accumulation of small evidence, the Simpson refrigerator's contents change between episodes. Not always, and not in ways that constitute a continuous record of grocery shopping, but often enough that the specific items visible in background shots of the kitchen are not always identical across episodes. The family eats, the food changes, the refrigerator records this. The front yard of the Simpson house shows seasonal variation. In autumn episodes, leaves accumulate on the lawn. In winter episodes, the lawn is a different texture. The yard is not always in the same state of maintenance. Sometimes the grass is high, sometimes it has clearly been recently cut. The yard exists in the world's time rather than the show's frozen time. Bart's bedroom, visible in establishing shots from the door or from inside, accumulates evidence of his ongoing life. Posters on the walls that have appeared and disappeared. Books that have been left in different positions on his desk. Clothes on the floor that are the clothes of a specific episode or the clothes of a continuous everyday life that exists between the episodes. These details are the show's private Easter eggs about continuity. They suggest, without ever stating, that Springfield's residents have lives that continue when the camera is not on them, that Homer has eaten since the last episode, that the seasons have turned, that Bart's room has continued to be Bart's room across the gap between episodes. The Easter egg is the gap itself, the visual evidence of a world that continues without narration, that maintains itself in the background details of scenes that are about other things, that exists because someone was paying attention to what real domestic life looks like between its most dramatic moments. Real domestic life is mostly between moments. The episodes are the moments. The background details of Springfield are the between. The between is where most of life actually lives. Springfield honors this. In the refrigerator contents and the yard's state and the bedroom's accumulation of evidence, in the small, specific, unheroic details that constitute the texture of an ongoing life. This is the show's deepest commitment, not to the stories it tells in its episodes, to the world it maintains in the spaces between them, to the suggestion, maintained through background details across 36 years, that its characters' lives are more continuous and more complete than any single episode can demonstrate. The episodes are the tip. The background world they inhabit is the entirety. And the Easter eggs that point toward that background world, the details that exceed the requirements of any story, that exist because someone was thinking about the world rather than the story, are the show's most honest contribution to the long and varied tradition of treating fictional worlds with the seriousness that real ones deserve. Springfield is serious. The people who made it were serious about it. The background details are the evidence. The between episodes life is the evidence. The refrigerator and the yard and the bedroom and the walls and the photographs and the bulletin board and the crack in the sidewalk and the second dog on Evergreen Terrace, these are all evidence. Evidence that someone cared about this town past the requirements of the story, past the requirements of the job, into the territory where affection lives, and attention, and the particular quality of care that produces Easter eggs rather than simply produces adequate backgrounds. The show has always been made with that care. You have spent this long night with the evidence of it. You are carrying it now. Take it with you. Full final script. Fall asleep to bizarre Simpsons Easter eggs. Confirmed complete. Additional section. The legacy of the detail. There is a specific quality that separates a show with Easter eggs from a show that merely has them. The difference is whether the Easter eggs feel like the natural expression of how the show thinks about itself, or whether they feel like deliberate additions, placed with the awareness that Easter eggs are something audiences appreciate, and therefore something shows should contain. The Simpsons has always been the former. The Easter eggs in this show do not feel added, they feel native. They feel like the consequence of a specific kind of engagement with the world the show is making, an engagement that could not help but produce hidden things because the people doing it cared more about the world than the stories required them to. When you care that much about a world, you fill it. You fill the refrigerator with specific food, and the walls with specific photographs, and the bookshelves with specific books, and the sidewalk with a specific crack, and the backyard with the right flowers. You do this not because anyone asked you to, not because the story requires it, but because when you are genuinely inside a world, you cannot help attending to the things that make it real. The Easter eggs of The Simpsons are the traces of genuine investment. They are the marks left by people who were genuinely inside Springfield while they were making it, who saw the town as a place rather than a set, who thought about its residents as people rather than characters, who attended to the quality of its light and the state of its lawns and the contents of its kitchens and the specific species of its background birds. This is the legacy of the detail. Not the specific Easter eggs themselves, though they are individually remarkable and worth the attention we have given them tonight. The legacy is what the Easter eggs collectively demonstrate, that the people who made this show were genuinely here, they were in this town, they attended to it, they left evidence of their attention in the background of every scene they built. The evidence persists. It will persist as long as the episodes persist, which, given the show's cultural significance and the permanence of digital media, means it will persist essentially indefinitely. The refrigerator and the crack in the sidewalk and the photograph pinned to Homer's garage wall and the firefly in the nighttime background will be there in every version of every episode that exists in any format on any platform for as long as media exists. The Easter eggs are permanent. The people who put them there are not. They will age. Some have already aged and moved on. Some have left the industry. Some have died. But the things they put in Springfield's margins are still there, waiting for the right viewer at the right hour with the right quality of attention. That viewer is you. This is the Easter egg that the whole show is, when you look at it from a certain angle. Someone made something beautiful. They filled its margins with evidence of caring. They trusted that someday, someone would find it. You found it. Good night for the last time. Springfield is grateful. It always has been. Final additional section. Springfield in the dark. This script has been about the things that are visible in Springfield when you look closely enough and at the right hour. But there is one more category of Easter egg that we have not addressed, and it is perhaps the most appropriate one to end with, because it belongs specifically to the hour at which this script is meant to be heard. The things that are only visible in the dark. Springfield, as a visual environment, was designed for the warm light of a television screen in a living room at 8 o'clock on a Sunday evening. That is its native context. That is the light in which it was meant to be seen. The colors of the show, the specific warm palette of the Simpsons' house and street, the amber of their kitchen light and the blue-black of Springfield's night sky, were calibrated for the specific luminosity of a television screen at the end of a weekend evening. But Springfield is also visible at other hours and in other contexts. On a laptop screen at midnight, on a phone in a dark room at 2 in the morning. On a large screen with all the room's lights off, with the specific quality of darkness that surrounds a screen when it is the only light source in a room. In that darkness, specific details in the show's visual design become visible that are less prominent in standard viewing conditions. The darker backgrounds of certain scenes. The specific quality of shadow in the show's night exteriors. The way the nuclear plant glows at the edge of establishing shots of Springfield at night. The show was designed for living room television viewing, but some of its most careful visual work is best appreciated in conditions closer to what we have described here, in the dark, with the screen as the only light, with the particular quality of attention that comes with this hour. This is not an Easter egg in the traditional sense. Nothing is hidden in the darkness. Nothing requires a specific frame capture or a high-definition rendering to be visible. The darkness itself is the condition that reveals, not conceals. But it is consistent with the practice of Easter eggs in the show, because it requires a specific condition to be fully appreciated. The condition of watching at this hour, in this way, with this quality of attention and this quality of surrounding dark, the show is different at this hour. Its colors are different, its light is different. The warm amber of the Simpsons' kitchen against the darkness of a room with no other light is different from the warm amber of the Simpsons' kitchen in a brightly lit room with other visual competition. In the dark, Springfield is more itself. The show has always been about this hour, about the specific quality of watching that this hour produces, about the kind of attention that comes when everything else has gone quiet and the screen is the world. In that attention, the Easter eggs are not hidden anymore. Everything is visible. The whole show is the Easter egg, the love encoded in it, the care. The specific flowers in the right yard, and the right crack in the sidewalk, and the firefly in the nighttime scene, all of it is visible, in the dark, at this hour. You are seeing it. That is enough. That has always been enough. Good night.